Chapter 1. Adventure begins. The sun sets on the horizon, casting long shadows in the fading orange glow. Streetlights turn on and families settle down for the evening with each other to share in their day. Well, almost all families. One woman stands on the balcony of her modest apartment, worried for her son has not returned home yet. She knows her son has been struggling in his life, one in which he was dealt a bad hand. Little did she know that at that moment, a young boy was busy shuffling the deck. 3 hours ago. They say that everyone is created equal. That was always a lie told to placate people's fear of being left behind. But when literal superpowers started manifesting in people throughout the world, things changed overnight. With more people rapidly getting these amazing powers, which everyone called quirks, experts suggest that the remaining population without the possession of a quirk is around 20%. What that doesn't tell you is that 99% of the quirkless are elderly or people from generations of quirkless. Some take pride in it and call themselves pure bloods, the last remaining humans in a land of monsters. However, for children, maybe 1 in a million doesn't have a quirk anymore. And this young boy is one such person. Being in the area after his diagnosis of his quirkless nature, he received pity from the people in his neighborhood. It was like being born with a disability, except for those born with non-functional legs or eyes. They can be fixed with someone else's quirk now. Not having a quirk, well, no one can give a quirk, this young man knows. He scoured the internet and textbooks, referencing quirks and their potential uses, and he found no evidence of any person who could bequeath a quirk to another. All the time spent though honed an ability of his to analyze and break down quirks as he sees them. He hasn't given up though. He knows somewhere there exists someone who can give him what he wants, not a powerful quirk, not riches or fame, but a chance to prove to everyone else that he's something and he matters. So it is why he went out looking again. He saw a report that a man was seen in the area. Rumors about him said to be that he has multiple quirks. They have seen the man in a black respirator mask, going into dead-end alleys and disappearing. It was rare enough that some people had 2 quirks, let alone described as having multiple. So the young boy went out after his middle school classes ended, hoping to learn something about that man's strange circumstance, ducking the bullies who decided this particular day would be used to practice their quirks on him. The young boy found his intended target, but was prevented from following when a battle between a villain and hero had come barreling down the street. The villain and hero both had fire quirks. The young boy recognized the hero as the upcoming number 4 hero Endeavor. He was rapidly climbing the ranks of the pro-hero scene. His power put him very high to begin with, and many people expect him to become the number 3 any day now. But in terms of likability, he was very much unlike his quirk, Cold. The villain was not someone he recognized, but many people don't pay much attention to villains unless they can make a name for themselves, and it looked like this particular villain wanted to prove he had the hots, his dark, blue flames casting foreboding shadows on the buildings as the 2 men dueled. It was some time later that the villain had to flee. Realizing he was outclassed in firepower, had fled down the alley that the young boy had seen his target go into. Endeavor had taken one look in the alley and darted off, as no one could be seen in it. The young boy, disheartened that he had missed his chance to speak to the person he had spent weeks tracking down. The only upside was the notes he could gather on both the blue flame user and the professional hero. It wasn't every day he could study fire quirk users up close, let alone 2 at the same time. The young boy closed his notes and turned to get his bearings again before he decided on which way he would need to go to get himself home. Until a sound, something he heard with some regularity, accosted his ears, a sound that made him freeze up, because anything less would result in more immediate pain. Oi, Deku. He knew pain was coming either way, but he did want to take as much time before he suffered. As he stood there in errant thought that maybe the pro-hero would come back and protect him from what was going to happen, the sheer thought that he might have any sort of luck graced his mind caused him to snort out a laugh. This laugh was later the cause of a more severe beating. "Oh, so you think this is funny, do you?" said a young boy with large, spiky blonde hair and piercing red eyes in what can only be described as resting bitch face. The young boy, identified as Deku, turned around to face the oncoming threat. Hi Kake Kaken, he managed to stutter out. Kaken wasn't alone. He had 2 other boys with him. A fat kid with what could be described as pitiful wings and another thin as a rail with elongated fingers. They took to Deku's back, cutting off any potential escape routes. Not that he could get far anyway. Kaken was much faster than him even without using his quirk. So Deku knew not to try. It was much easier to get it over with so they could all be on their way. So what was so important that you had to prevent us from training with our quirks? You know we are only trying to be heroes so we can save worthless people like you from the bad guys. With a sneer that could only come from practiced use, Kaken approaches the boy and shoves him into what became the most important alley of his life. Don't worry, we can still have time before dinner to get some practice in. For the next hour, Deku was beaten, burned, and bruised by the three boys. They tossed his injured body into a pile of garbage bags and left the alley laughing as he slowly pulled himself from the filth. SSSSSSS? Huh. SSSS. The labored breathing of a young boy as he clenches the side of his torso shambles out onto the main walkway, peeling a scrap of garbage off of his shoulder as he joins in the foot traffic of the sidewalk. He pushes past pedestrians as he makes his way down the path he thinks he had decided to go before the closest thing to a friend interrupted his thoughts. So while slowly walking, the sun slowly setting, the streets clearing as people make their way home and inside. Then the realization sets in. He has gotten lost. So, like any 12-year-old child will do when they get lost, he sat down and cried. Cried because he's lost, because he's hurt, because he knows that he will have to call his mother to come get him and explain what happened, because he knows that doing that will only cause her pain. So he cries, until a sound, much like a chime, jingles behind him. If not for the memory that a wall should have been behind him, he might not have thought anything of the generic noise that one associates with a convenience store. Turning, he sees a shop. It's a small shack, missing letters from the sign and faded paint and cracks along the dark wooden exterior. But beneath the growing moss and rotted wood he can still understand the name of the place, the Shop of Legends, where heroes are made. The young boy is taken aback. A building like this shouldn't be just resting in the middle of a suburban neighborhood, and it definitely wasn't there when he was heading this way. Intrigued, he slowly gets up from his seated spot on the ground, trying his best to ignore the soreness in his gut from earlier. He makes his way to the door and walks in. Author's Notes V2. This is a re-edit and re-upload of the first chapter. I will be trying to see if I can do this to all my stories that I have written so that they may read better. I don't think there will be any significant changes. At least I will try to not change plot points and such when doing this. In addition, I will also be working on uploading these chapters to Archive of Our Own, under the same username StevenTLawson, so that I can begin the process of cross-posting. It may take some time, but I hope to get this done shortly and that it doesn't alarm any of my readers to see this activity. Author's Notes. So I finally decided to stop being a pussy and actually get around to writing a story of my own, instead of just critiquing others' work and writing reviews. So I thought I would start with a My Hero Academia story. I read many stories where Izuku got quirks, got training, or even magic, but most of those are just taking abilities from other stories and characters, so it resembles other magic users from anime and comics. Instead, I want him to have magic, real magic, but styled as how our world views magicians. From Houdini to Chris Angel, Izuku is going to do what they did, but for real. He will have style and panache. His magic will be flashy, but I will try to make it not offensive, so he isn't just throwing fireballs and won't be a god either. One of the important notes is that I will be making some distinct changes to how people act. I see that in the canon, the general society views big powerful quirks like endeavors and all mights as the be-all and all of it. But really thinking on it, people like Recovery Girl or Momo are so much more useful for society. So I will have UA/UE reflect that underlying need in society. Because while the author of the series stated that people like Hagakure and Mineta were able to defeat the robots, it doesn't make much sense that someone as cowardly as Mineta wouldn't just panic when a robot aims giant cannons at him. And that gets me to the other background characters. They see very little use, and if you are someone who I have placed a review on your story, I have mentioned that a few times in them. So choices must be made. Not just pertaining to what's in the story, but what is out of it. It's only fair to you, the readers, that you understand what kind of story this is and when and how it will be made. So I want to give you guys the option of input. So before we begin, I will say that certain key events will still happen. Sludge Villain, USJ, Sports Festival. Those will all happen, but different. First off, Izuku will not get one for all. I repeat, Izuku and one for all, not happening. So if you think he would be the world's first muscle wizard, and cast fists to solve his problems. That will not happen. If that disappoints you, I'm sorry. I might get around to making a story where Izuku gets the quirk, but this will not be one of them. The why. The second most important part, what motivates people. It may seem like Izuku is getting pretty beat up, but without input from readers, this would be about as bad it gets. So the purpose of this is a simple. How dark and edgy do you want? I think as it is, it's pretty close to canon in terms of violence. But some people may want it more tame, and other may want a bit more of an edge. Note I will not make it too tame or too edgy either. So if it starts looking like bad Sonic fanfic, either way I'll rein it back in. So that covers what will go on before we even get to UA/UE. There will be more notes and further chapters to try and give options to the readers, so I will try to provide when those changes will be happening, but I will want to go from canon on some parts and delve into the time between major arcs. I know the USJ happens within the first week of classes, but the sports festival seems like it would have been in the second month of classes, so there is time for events to happen that are outside of the canon. And I guess there will need to be a discussion on shipping. There will be plenty of time to pick apart out favorite problem child's love life in the next few chapters. First, he needs a training montage. More discussions will happen in later chapters, so be patient, and let's see what I can make him suffer through before alienating all my readers. Lastly, most importantly, yes, everything is most important. I want reviews, brutal reviews. Tear me apart, criticize my word choice, grammar, spelling. I want to be utterly annihilated when I read the comments from people. This is not a don't like, don't read. It's a don't like. Tell me what you don't like and I will try to improve. Chapter 2. Meeting with a store owner. Having entered the shop, the young boy is stunned. What on the outside looked like a small, dilapidated shop does not betray the interior. He was greeted by the scent of burning incense and a soft melody playing from behind the counter. Beyond that, everything else was a mystery to him. His eyes flittering over the numerous baubles and trinkets as he cautiously makes his way through the store. A shelf containing golden objects with the only distinct feature being the large eye in the center of each object, another with a dark obsidian-looking beads arranged in the form of a necklace. He turns around and shrieks, finding himself face to many faces of shrunken heads all bunched together on a coat rack. Jumping back, he bumps into a shelf. He turns as he watches various glass-like orbs fall towards the ground. Flailing about trying to prevent any of them from shattering on the floor, he manages to catch one. The others harmlessly bounce along the wooden planks and roll under shelves across the store. A quick clearing of the throat from behind him, however, startles the young boy into dropping the sphere he was holding. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean to make a me mess," said the young boy. "I'll clean it you up." The person who startled him, however, begins to laugh. Taking in the sight of the woman, he begins to calm down. She looks to be an old lady, with gray hair and a simple blue dress. After wiping the tears that had begun to form in her eyes, she recognizes that she may have gone too far with the young lad. "Oh ho ho, I am sorry, my child. I guess I developed a bit of a mischievous streak after living here for so long. Don't worry so much about those half-dozen orange balls. One of them went missing a long time ago and they just haven't worked since." She turns away and begins to shuffle her way to the counter. Not hearing the young boy following her, she starts again. "We don't have all day now, young man. What brings you to my shop?" Clearing his throat, he realizes he had been staring for longer than he should have. Ahem. "I am Izuku Midoriya. I didn't mean to come into your shop. I just got lost." The woman has shuffled behind the counter at this point and is pointing her head over the top and staring at Izuku, yet for some reason he feels that she's staring past him. "But of course you were," she sounds, calm and soothing. "The only people who can find this shop are the ones who got lost, but whoever lost them is always different." She pulls a large book from underneath the counter and sets it down and begins thumbing through the pages, seemingly forgetting about her guest. Izuku, timid as he is, knows he should continue this conversation with this strange lady. Do you think you can tell me how to get where I want to go?" If he was a bit more perceptive, he would have seen the glint in the woman's eye. "It's starting to get late, and I don't want to worry my mother," quietly under his breath, "more than I already do." The old lady pulls a large black feather and carefully places it in between the pages of the book, closing it and setting the book back under the counter. What would she have to worry about? "You seem like a nice, bright young man. A little dirty and roughed up, but boys will be boys. What would she ever have to worry about? She begins her inquisition. Well, you see. Izuku begins to speak, not sure why he feels so comfortable with this old woman, that he hasn't even stuttered during this conversation yet. Might it have something to do with you not having a quirk? Eyebrow raised, not taking her eyes off of the lad. She can tell just by the way he shifts his body around. She is right on the money. Well, we all have things we struggle with. I myself had a hard time keeping up this shop when I first started. She gazes longingly out the window, as if expecting a visitor. But not being able to do something is no reason to worry. It's very natural. Mused as she returns her gaze to Izuku. But I'm not natural. I'm a freak. Everyone has these amazing gifts, and I'm just a Deku, belting out a response to the old lady's wisdom. I get beaten and humiliated every day, and my mom struggles, and it's all my fault. I'm worthless and I ruined everything I touch because I don't have a quirk. Tears already flowing down his face as he begins his rant. Struggling to keep in one place, Izuku wants nothing more than to lash out at himself, the world, and the people who hurt him. He doesn't even hear the old lady approach him and pull him into a tight embrace. Oh, shhhhh, child, it's okay. She croons as she begins stroking his hair. Hearing his sobs turn into hiccups as he blubbers out an apology for his outburst. A young man like you, who had to take all the hate the world has and keep smiling, even if it was just for your mother. You are so very strong, so very brave and kind. Patting his back as he ends up sniffling. But I just cried and pitted myself, said Izuku, confused at the words the woman says to him. How does that make me strong and brave? As he uses his jacket sleeve to wipe his eyes. Do you know why humans cry, Izuku? She asks, seeing him shake his head awaiting an explanation. We cry as a way to let others know we are in distress. When words are not enough to express how much we are hurting and suffering, crying is how we can tell another, from any language to any culture, that you need help. She pushes him back, holding him at arm's length to look him in the eyes. It takes a very brave and strong person to ask for help. So, you just tell this old granny what you need help with. Just want to be a hero so much, Izuku whimpers out. This response surprises the grandma so much she can only respond with, oh, but I don't have a quirk and I just can't do it. I'm not strong. I'm not fast. I can't even move stuff with my mind like my mom. Izuku, on the verge of another breakdown, asks, so how can I be a hero? The only sound besides the slow sniffles and hiccups of Izuku and the soft music from under the counter is laughter. It starts out as a slow giggle and then grows into a wild cackle. If he wasn't so startled, he would have been disgusted that he could bare his soul to this stranger and that she would begin to laugh at him. He begins to pull away from her, finding himself unable to escape her surprisingly powerful grip. Oh no, please don't run. I'm sorry, I just haven't heard such a story in a very long time. I mean no disrespect. The old lady begins to plead. I just found it funny that this society, any society, would look at a child who wants nothing more than to help people with all his heart and then do everything it can to beat that out of him. It's a dark humor. I told you I spent too long in this store. She releases her grasp on the boy. She catches her breath as Izuku takes a step back from her. I take it you forgot what store you walked into? The tilting of his head seems to tell her everything she needs to know. We are the shop of legends and our motto is, where heroes are made. So come on, I have just the means to make you a hero. As she once again returns to counter, grabbing a deck of cards along the way. This sudden shift in demeanor after such an emotional experience leave Izuku more than confused. He's barely able to parse the words she is saying into some understanding. As he steps toward the counter the shopkeeper sits at, he begins to mutter. What does she mean? Make me a hero. What do those cards have to do with this? Could she just be making it up? Am I in danger? Should I trust her? The muttering goes on as the air thickens with his anxiety. The slow approach and his nervous nature slowly begins to irritate the woman. Come on, Midoriya. I may be old, but I don't have all day. She shortly says to him, snapping him from his thoughts. This is enough to make him rush up to the counter. Giving another apology, he looks at the deck in between them both. Staring at the cards, he asks the obvious question, how are cards going to make me a hero? He slowly reaches his hand out to the deck, only to squeak out a surprise as the store owner grabs his wrist. Bringing his gaze to match hers, he is taken by the sudden fire and youth in her eyes, a seriousness he hasn't seen in a long time. These cards, the words, carrying an incredible weight behind them, are old. They can tell much about a person. A single card capable of holding an entire story in them, or changing one altogether. These are the cards of fate. Tarot cards? Said with a level of incredulousness he wasn't aware he had. No, not those cheap knockoffs. Letting go of his wrist. These are the original. What every two-bit fortune teller wishes they had. Should you draw one, it will dramatically change your fate. Friends, enemies, lovers, and rivals. Ones that might have happened might not. You won't be able to go back once you draw. So, if I draw a card, I can be a hero? To Izuku, even saying those words sounded ridiculous. But he did spend almost a month chasing down a masked guy on the rumor he had more than one quirk. And maybe Kachin hit him a bit harder than he normally does. So he's actually considering this. How much? Well, aren't you eager? Chuckled the old woman. We don't take cash, only trade. For something like this, the price is normally, her voice deepens, your soul. A mad cackle comes out, only to stop in a cough. Thought I had the sound system set up for that. Supposed to be spooky sounds and lightning, and the lights were meant to flicker too. Oh well. But normally the price is too steep for even the wealthiest and too costly for the most powerful. Oh, but you are such a good and honest boy, who truly wants to help people. Don't see too many of those these days, a dying breed you are. And I might say a little cutie too. This comment causes Izuku's face to flush, so I can take what would have been his trade. All you have to do is shuffle the deck and draw a single card. So, what say you? Izuku stares as the deck. After absorbing the words from the shop owner, he considers what life has in store for him. More bullying, more neglect, hate, anger, and disappointment. But with this, all that changes, and he can be a hero. He tentatively reaches for the deck, only to stop and ask one last question. Will my mother have to worry about me? A light chuckle. Young Izuku, a mother will always worry about her babies. But I can say she will never have been prouder of you. With that said, any remaining doubt Izuku had was extinguished, and with a newfound confidence he shuffled the deck, setting it down and finally drawing a card. From beneath his clenched eyes, Izuku looked at the card he had drawn, exhaling his breath he didn't know he was holding. The card itself felt like it was made of the same material all cards were, but this was noticeably heavier and much sturdier than a normal playing card. Turning to see the face, he was greeted by a simple design. A lemniscate overlaid on an asymmetrical hexagram. A simple, huh, escaped his lips. Looking back up, he sees the old lady staring at him questioning. I'm sorry, I just thought that something would happen when I drew the card, like flashing lights, or you know. This earns a chuckle from shopkeeper. It's quite all right. After my first interaction with magic, I felt much the same. But the card you drew, it's the magician. Quite powerful if you can learn. You don't have a problem studying, do you? She inquired. Izuku shakes his head and was about to respond when a chime can be heard from an antique clock in the corner. Oh dear, is it already that late? Izuku, it's been wonderful having you here, and I wish you the best of luck. Hopefully we can meet again later in the future. She begins pushing him out of the store. Oh, I never got your name, ma'am. He called out as he turned to face her one last time. I am Sophie. Now if you want to get home as quick as possible, head left. She points to Izuku's right. Then make a right at the intersection. You'll start to see familiar area in about a kilometer. She turns to head inside. Wait! A final squeak from Izuku. Sophie turns to face the young man. Miss Sophie, thank you, bowing to her. I always wanted someone to tell me that I could be a hero, and you have given me a chance. This earns a small chuckle from Sophie. I have to go now, but I hope I can see you again. A short goodbye from Sophie as she watches Izuku run down the street. A click as the door locks and a turn of a dial as she heads into the back of the shop. Author's notes. And this concludes the second chapter in A Magician's Secret. I hope I got the formatting down better, broke up the large paragraphs and separated the dialogue. I tried to use more descriptive language, so it isn't. He says. She says. He says. But if that becomes tedious, I can start to trim that back. I was going for, if you were watching this as an episode, how would people move around? Since I don't want to give the impression that everyone is just statically standing speaking like a cutscene, but they make small movements that people would do in a conversation. So now begins my journey on writing Chapter 3, aka the montage chapter. Cue training music. Izuku has 3 years to practice and train before he meets up with the sludge villain. Next, Chapter 1 will explain the rules of magic. This will serve a few purposes. One, it limits him. So I can't just write an pull of Izuku casts a spell and all evil in the world is gone. None of that. If I did not mention it, or just to reiterate, if I did, his magic will be styled like our magicians, but his will be real magic, so there will be some differences in their functionality. But I will do what I can to have most of his early magic be based off of tricks from magicians, so there will be reference material for those who want to go digging. Otherwise, it will be his own cleverness on his use of his magic. So hopefully this chapter provides you with the impetus that I will be deviating from canon. For the people who may wonder why Izuku lost his stutter talking with Sophie, I stand by that. Izuku would only do that when nervous, and he saw Sophie as a grandmother type. So why would he feel nervous speaking to her? It also helps that she is a very calm person, so she was very easy to talk with. So far I am writing short chapters, since at this stage much of it is very non-canon events, so I don't want to get caught up in dragging it out, since to me the big meat of a story is when the characters get together. So I will try to do frequent updates to do this section, which is more of the prologue, to when we get to see the events as people knew them. After the sludge villain, I will probably drop the update to once or twice a week, so I don't burn out, but I will have at least another chapter before we make it to canon time. After which I will try to figure out how to make a poll and set up some options for people to choose for what they want to see happen in later chapters. So be patient and let's see what I can write. And remember, leave brutal reviews. Chapter 3, the pre-montage stage. Standing on the balcony of her apartment stands a woman, with long green hair tied up in a bun, wearing an apron over a pink dress. The last lights of the sun are dripping over the roofs of the buildings. In the distance, she begins to see the many street lights come on. This worries her greatly. Her son, Izuku, has never been this late before. He would call or text when he stayed out late. For a normal parent, this might seem a bit much. Kids staying out late, playing, and having fun. Except her son has a hobby that frankly terrifies her. He a hero hunter, always chasing the latest fights and prowling high-risk areas hoping to see quirks in action. She wants so much to tell him to get another hobby, one that doesn't leave her worried if her son will be collateral damage in a fight, but she can see it's the only thing in his life that makes him happy. After his diagnosis, he began to shut down. His friends stopped coming over. He was sad all the time, and she never could bring herself to confront him about the bruises and cuts he covers up in the bathroom when he thinks he isn't being watched. The only savings grace is her childhood friend Mitsuki, at least her son. Katsuki is the same age as Izuku and have been friends ever since they were born. She would prefer that Katsuki was a little less rough around the edges, but he takes after his mother, so she understands. She hears a door knob turn and a door open, followed by a proclamation that she has been waiting the last few hours for. "Mom, I'm home." A small smile graces her lips. Inko Midoriya heads inside to welcome her son back home and to scold him for not letting her know he would be running late. Her first glance at the state of her son sets off alarm bells in her head. There stands Izuku covered in grime, dirt, and what looks like blood, bruises on his cheek, and one of his eyes looks to be swelling shut. But the most startling of all is the smile, the bright, million-watt smile that seems to be trying its hardest to brighten up the room. And everything melts away. The concern for his well-being becomes second to knowing what was able to put such a genuine and brilliant smile on her normally gloomy son's face. So, she plays it cool, about as much as a mom can. "So, sweetie, did you have good day at school?" She begins her inquisition. "Nope," replied Izuku with all the cheerfulness of a kid in a candy store. "I got a bunch of homework, and the teachers barely looked at me." If she wasn't so sure he would be treated the same at every other school, she would have transferred him faster than All Might can save the day. But she can't afford a private school or tutors to spare him from what must be a dismal education. "Oh, so did Katsuki play with you today?" came the next question. Eyeing him as his smile faltered for a second, this was another warning sign that something was wrong. She had her suspicions that Katsuki was not very gentle with her son, but without anything to go off of, she couldn't do anything to help. She would talk to Mitsuki, who would then give Katsuki an earful for being too rough, and it would seem to lessen the situation for a while, but then go right back to how it was. Yeah, but he just wanted to practice his quirk, so I just kinda stood around. Izuku told his mother, while bending the events to not worry her. At this point, Inko had moved into the kitchen to begin preparing a late dinner. It was a Friday, so Izuku would probably stay up late watching hero videos, and a later supper would mean he would snack less in the night. Just because the depression she went through, scratch that, is going through doesn't mean he needs to eat junk food like she does to cope. It certainly did a number on her figure. She even seemed to have shrunk a few inches too. Thankfully, the stress hasn't caused her hair to fall out. But she likes to think she still has what it takes to turn a few heads when she tries. Well, we ruled out school and his only friend, she mused. What could be the cause of his sudden shift in demeanor? Izuku, sensing this game of questions could go on for a while, decides to just provide the answer she is looking for. So I spent the last few weeks tracking rumors of a guy who had multiple quirks, he began explaining. This was no surprise, as Inko would regularly see her son looking up heroes for their quirks, as he said one of them must have a way for me to get one. After finding no evidence, he turned his attention to vigilantes. There was less information, but as he put it, they just want to help people and not be held up by the rules and regulations that pros have to deal with. She wasn't happy about that, but she drew the line when she saw him going through prison records about villains and their quirks. She wasn't about to let her son interact with dangerous criminals to try and get a quirk. Stuck in her thoughts, she missed his various mumbling about what sites and references he used, but the comment of, "So I tracked him down to a few kilometers away from here," brought her right back to the conversation. "Wait a minute, you stalked some stranger because of rumors on the internet," she exclaimed. This was a big worry that her son, in the pursuit of a quirk, would start down the path of delinquency. First it was stalking people, then it was smoking, and finally he would be getting girls pregnant. A whimper of, "My baby is too young to be a father," between quiet sobs, causing Izuku to respond quickly. "Mom, no, stop, I'm not doing whatever it is you think I'm doing. Plus, it's not stalking since I never even caught up to him. I just saw him once. Endeavor and some villain started burning up a city block in front of me. It's okay, the worst that could have happened would be getting burned to death." This only caused Inko's sobs to become full-on wails. But, I met this nice old lady." He tried to speak over her breakdown. "She told me I can be a hero." This seemingly innocuous statement pierced through the cacophony of the older woman as she ceased her crying and looked at him. Those 5 simple words she couldn't bring herself to say when her son needed to hear them the most, and they came from a complete stranger. It was no wonder he was so elated. He finally had someone who believed in his dream. She did. What she intended as a statement came out more as a question. Yup, she told me she believed that someone like me, who wanted to help people, shouldn't be held back just because I don't have a quirk, so she gave me a chance. Izuku then went on to explain to his mother about the store and Sophie. It was an emotional tale about how he trashed part of a store and cried for an old lady, and she believed every word of it. So, she let you draw a card that would change your fate, and all it would cost was your current fate. Confused at how simple and strange that sounds. Since I was never going to get a quirk, I probably wasn't going to live a very eventful or even long life. That latter part of that statement hitting her harder than she would let on. She knew the statistics. Over 50% of quirkless people attempted suicide before finishing high school. 80% of them succeeded by their second try. It worried her that her son would become just a number in the future, but she didn't know what to do. Now there was a hope she didn't even know she could have, that her son's future might be entirely different, all because of some strange old lady in a strange old shop. If she was able to find that Sophie, she would have to give her a big hug just for the smile she got to see on her darling son's face, one she hadn't seen in many years. "So, did she say what quirk you would get?" she asked, "because magician doesn't sound like any quirk I had ever heard of, but you are the expert on quirks." Izuku shakes his head. "She just said I had the magician card and that I would have to study a lot." This leads to him mumbling ideas again. Inko, knowing that her son, left unattended, will stay like this for a while, nudges him. Well, before you go off and start practicing your new quirk, go get cleaned up and we can eat. How does that sound? Izuku was going to protest his mother's kindly suggestion when his stomach started to growl and he realizes he hadn't eaten since lunch that day, quite a number of hours ago, and then he remembered being thrown in garbage, so he probably had enough of a stench that his mother could smell him coming from a mile away. Blushing and shuffling his feet awkwardly, he nods, "Right, I'll go get cleaned up." Heading off to his room to grab a change of clothes before hitting the shower, he steps into his room and sitting on his bed, a large trunk, old-looking, made of aged leather with metal locks and clasps that look as though they would rust off any minute. "Hey, Mom, did you go in my room today?" He calls down the hall. "No, sweetie. Is something wrong?" Not wanting to draw attention to this change just yet, he comes up with a plan. "Just couldn't find my favorite all-might shirt is all." Getting a response to check his hamper, he expertly defused that situation. Approaching the trunk on his bed, he runs his fingers over the cool leather. In doing so, one of the locks clacks open, startling the boy. Tentatively, he opens the compartment. Carefully lifting the lid, he peers inside and sees 4 simple objects: a book, a black plastic wand with white tipped ends, a top hat with a white band, and lastly a cloak. Taking these items out of the box and inspecting them, they seem fairly ordinary. A tap of the wand. Reaching into the hat and feeling the fabric of the cloak, he determines these are pretty cheaply made. He sets those on his desk and turns to the book. An eerie calm sets over him as he slides his hands down the spine of the tome, feeling beneath his fingertips of an old and ancient power hidden in the pages. He cracks it open to the first page, finding it contains a few words, in a language he doesn't understand. Flipping the pages, finds the rest blank. Returning to the first page, he sees the words slowly begin to glow and reshape themselves into kanji. It reads as, "To claim ownership of this ancient wisdom of mages, one must place a belief and trust in the arts taught. Place your hand on the page and state your intentions." Izuku stares at the page and slowly places his hand on the parchment, and with a conviction only mustered in times of needs, proudly declares, "I want to be a hero." The only response is a blinding light as kanji and drawings begin to fly around the room and go into the book, filling the pages with information and what he can only assume the magic he will need to study. He quickly returns to the first page to see any changes, and the text now reads, "Magic is a wondrous power that for millennia was used by many to ease their burdens in life. But like all power, it can be used for terrible things. So rules were put in place to protect. Magic cannot be used to kill, nor can it be used to bring life back to those who lost it. Magic cannot interfere with love in all its forms. The purity of it cannot be tainted by magic. Magic cannot self-propagate, nor can it bring matter into existence. These are set in the ways of reality to prevent abuse of magicians on the innocent." As Izuku began to read the words and turn the pages, he starts to recognize some of the spells, well, more like tricks. He's seen them done in movies and at videos or parties that hire a magician, not that he's seen them in person, since he never got invited to birthday parties. But it shows pulling a rabbit out of a hat, turning a wand into various flowers, pulling items from beneath the cloak. Before he can consider getting started on practicing some tricks, he is interrupted by the growling of his stomach. Realizing the book is still going to be there when he finishes cleaning up and eating, he sets it down and prepares himself, unaware that this was just the first step on his way to become the greatest magician the world ever saw. Author's notes. Alright, got chapter 3 knocked out. Yet took 3 chapters just for Izuku to make it home. But now, he will get his first taste of what being a magician means. So for those of you who fell in love with Houdini and Criss Angel, get ready. In the next chapter, it's all about how he practices his craft, what he needs, and he learns that there are a few more rules that just aren't spoken about. How he spends his next 3 years before his confrontation with the sludge villain will be very telling about his cleverness, dedication, and education to how he uses his magic. So I hope I'm able to accurately explain what he is learning, so I don't show it in flashbacks that, oh, he conveniently learned this while no one saw. At the worst, I want to allude to certain tricks he may have practiced with mentions of certain props. However, let's have a real discussion. I hate the entrance exam. It's stupid and nonsensical that someone as smart as the principal would fill his hero course with a bunch of students who can just smash robots. It's weird that since people like Kaminari and Ishido, while definitely capable of smashing robots, would score high enough to pass the written exam as well. So I will be doing some restructuring of the exam and of the school itself. First change, the students will not fight robots. The practical will be a demonstration of your quirk and how you use it. So it will be broken up into 3 categories: utility, rescue, combat. To explain, utility would be like Hagakure. Her quirk lets her be a master of stealth, so she would want to be tested on that regard. So they would have her retrieve a file while doing her best at being undetected. Rescue would be someone like Recovery Girl. Demonstrate that your quirk can help in a crisis situation in the various stages of the crisis, to finding survivors, mitigating collateral damage, and aiding the injured. Combat is pretty straightforward. You have 1 minute to battle a teacher chosen at random. Demonstrate some promise in the fight to either submission or holding your own for that time. However, passing one category does not mean you will only be trained in that regard. Everyone will go through training to be suited for more situations. Slight spoilers: the principal saw the video of the sludge villain, realized that no less than 5 heroes, he counted All Might, were sitting on their hands waiting for someone else with a more applicable quirk to come in and save the day. He decided that heroes are going to be trained to handle more situations than just in their initial wheelhouse. This will also lead to the classes mixing and blending together, so that the hero course is not the only ones getting this training. Since the purpose of the support and business course is to handle the background affairs of heroes, between supplies and managing PR and firms, they will be more involved in seeing the hero course train and use their quirks to better support their needs. The result of this change will be that many students will receive a bit of a power boost by having more focused support, so some should start hitting above their weight class a lot sooner than in canon. Secondly, the general course, considered by many to be the waiting and the wings course, will on occasion have joint exercises with the hero course to keep an eye out for potential transfers. The threat made in canon about the sports festival was a shame that it never followed through about some students being replaced by other. So this can happen as well. Lastly, UA/UE is the premier hero academy in Japan. People come from all over the country and a few from other countries to attend. It makes no sense to me for it not to also have dorms for students who the daily commute would be extensive or prohibitive to a healthy schedule. So some students will be in the dorms earlier than in canon, solely because I convinced myself that it made more sense. I.e. Ochako has to get an apartment to go to school every day, since it would take too long to travel from her home, so I assume some other students are also in that situation. So an academy like this having dorms for those students makes far too much sense to not include. This also selfishly gives me more opportunities for the students themselves to interact in a non-academic setting, which also eases into the idea of mandatory dorms after the incident with All Might and All for One. I know the author's notes seem to be taking up a large portion of this chapter, but now that I can start to take off the training wheels, I felt it was only fair to start informing you, the readers, of my intended changes to canon solely, so it doesn't blindside people and turn them off when they don't like sudden changes. Hopefully I can get another chapter done quickly before hitting the canon timeline. From there, I will slow updates down to a more reasonable pace so I don't burn myself out, in case some people were worried about that. Chapter 4, Friendship Rekindled. And thus, began Izuku's long journey to learning his craft. It started simple. He would read the ancient tome every morning, gradually taking in the information and translating some of the more difficult concepts, so after nearly a month of just reading the book in the hopes of gleaning how to begin using this newfound power of his, he came to a few conclusions. Everyone's magic is different. He wouldn't have to walk with a staff, grow a long beard and wear pointy hats, much to his relief. And it seemed that the trunk, having 6 compartments, would open after he achieved a new baseline for his magic. It also determined what magic was best suited for the wielder. So Izuku had to do some research to figure out what his outfit meant, which wasn't long. He pulled up old records of people who called themselves magicians doing tricks and using props. But since the trunk only gave him a wand, hat, and cloak to work with, he guessed he was limited to the most basic of magic. As he flipped through the pages, he noticed that surprisingly the book focused on magic that involved what the trunk gave him, so it left him wondering if he was given some other implements would the book be different. This left him muttering for a while at the kitchen table. When his mom came in, it was a Sunday, so he was lazing about without much to do. Inko, as she walked by, saw her son's face buried in that same book he had a month ago. She questioned why, if he was supposedly given a quirk, that she hadn't seen it yet, and worried that he got tricked into buying a bunch of junk from a store and given a story to make him feel better, and while she wanted to question it, she couldn't bring herself to take this away from him. This new obsession overrode his own, more dangerous, previous one of chasing down fights and sulking about not having a quirk, so she deemed this healthy enough behavior, and who knows, maybe he gets good enough at parlor tricks to make a few friends, some who won't beat him up. Because everyone knows magicians are super popular with teenagers and almost teens, right? Noticing that while she was cleaning some dishes, Izuku was still stuck muttering, she decided to break her silence. "Sweetie, what does your new textbook say?" she mused. "I want to see some tricks." With a little more of a mocking tone than she may have intended, Inko puts on her best pouty face for her son. Izuku has always been a mama's boy, so when Inko does this routine, she knows she always gets her way. "Mom, don't do that," Izuku whined. "You know I can't say no to that face. I'll show you something. This passage in the book was just giving me pause." This piqued her curiosity a little, coming around to look over her son's shoulder, and is immediately aware that she has no clue what language it is that her son is reading, confusing her more since she doesn't ever recall Izuku signing up to learn another language either. Izuku dear, how can you read this?" Turning to look at her son, not expecting him to be the one confused at her question. "What do you mean, Mom? This isn't in a different language, it's just kanji." Izuku turns back to the book to make sure it was as he said, and all he sees is kanji. This causes Inko to grab the notepad on the fridge kept there when writing a grocery list. Using the pen attached, she draws one of the symbols. Izuku is watching her with earnest. He sees the motion she makes, knowing that there is no kanji for that symbol, but when he looks at it, he is capable of reading it. So the tome gives the only me the ability to translate it. How does it do that? Is it a visual effect or a mental one? Have I just learned an entirely new language? Could I speak this language? This new discovery sets Izuku on another muttering spree when he is confronted with this knowledge. Inko, wanting to get back to the point at hand, grabs Izuku by the shoulder. "Honey, not the point." She gets his attention. "You will have plenty of time to ponder when you learn this language and if there are any other benefits to that. Now what was confusing you, before everything else at least?" "All right, well, the passage mentions that while there are universal rules to magic, each school has its own set of rules, rites, and traditions. But it doesn't say what that is, so I can't seem to understand the rules that would apply to what magic I'm supposed to use, and I don't want to break them," he began. "If I could figure out what I am and what my magic is, then how it works, and the only thing I can find is that what I got is what a magician wore. But that doesn't tell me how I can avoid breaking the rules." As Izuku pondered, Inko had a different idea. "Since the book doesn't say what the rules are for your magic, then why not try some, and maybe you'll figure it out." The sudden realization on Izuku's face caused her a few small giggles. Her son could be too cautious for his own good and might benefit coming out of his comfort zone every once in a while. Be bold, take a risk, and he might just find what he is looking for. At this sudden clarity, Izuku turns back the pages of the book and settles on a trick. Turning his gaze to his wand, he picks it up, tucks it into the palm of his hand, concentrates, exhales, and quickly removes his hands, leaving the wand floating in the air. With a shriek, his mom grabs him into a hug. "Oh, Izuku, you have a quirk. It's just like Mommy's," twirling him around the room. He starts to get dizzy, almost foaming at the mouth in this bone-crushing embrace. Tapping out on his mom's arm, she lets him go. "Oh, tell me how you did it." Her excitement ever increasing. Well, first I placed the wand in the crook of my hand. Then I felt like I channeled the energy into the wand. After moving my hand, it stayed." Izuku explained. "Here, let me show you." As Izuku palms his wand again, repeating the same motion, when he lets go, the wand simply falls to the floor. Confused, he picks up the wand again, repeating the trick, only to have it fail. "This doesn't make sense." He frantically picks up the book, flipping page after page. "I'm doing as it told me. Followed the steps." Inko comes up behind him and leans over him to peek at the book. "Maybe it's one of those rules and you broke one," proposing that he had broken an unknown tenet of his quirk. Considering this, he goes back to the first page of the book and watches as more letters form. A magician never reveals their secret. Those words ingrain themselves into his brain. He can't tell anyone how he does it. Turning to his mother, Izuku concludes, I think since I told you how I did it, I can't do it anymore. A small look of horror crosses his face at the realization of what that means. So I can show my tricks, do them all, but if I tell anyone the magic goes away. Hurriedly, he grabs the book, flips over to another page, scans it, then grabs the hat. Reaching it up to his shoulder, he pulls out another wand, breathing out a sigh of relief that his magic isn't gone. It seems that I can't do that trick anymore, or at least I can't do it the same way maybe. Inko slowly walks up to him and begins running her fingers through the tussles in his hair. It's a soothing feeling for Izuku, and one he needs now after a mini panic that he suddenly lost his gift a month after getting it. She doesn't understand why he keeps referring to it as magic, but she isn't one to complain about it. It's his quirk, and he can call it whatever he wants now. She mentally makes a note to go to a doctor to have his medical record corrected about his quirk. Mild telekinesis. Sure, it doesn't match up to what she saw him do with the hat, but the wand just shows he takes after her more than his father, wherever he is. Well, dear, I am going to finish getting dinner ready. You put your stuff away and set the table. Okay, Mom, is all he replies. From that night on, Izuku would practice his new abilities. One of the first things he tried was getting his wand to levitate again. He found new ways to do it, but he knows that just palming the wand, the simplest way, isn't an option anymore. It wasn't as flashy, so he has been practicing a more fluid motion. This allows him to have his wand, or really any object, to orbit around him in various speeds, patterns, and he can even have them spin and rotate. This took him around 2 months to get down pat. So he's been practicing making them at a heavier weight, but he seems to be limited to around 10 kilos. This lead to him practicing some more tricks. He has made the cloak of his hard as steel or as pliable as rubber, so he found ways to bounce stuff off of it. The hat tricks were very difficult and he's been practicing it, but it's still a long ways away. He can store stuff in his hat and he even managed to pull a rabbit out. However, he noticed it had a collar on it and read that this was someone's pet. He understands what that third rule meant. He doesn't just make a rabbit when he pulls it from the hat. It has to come from somewhere, and he just kidnapped someone's pet. Scrambling to gently shove the furred creature back into the hat, hoping it made its way home. So he stuck to just using it to store his notebooks and other things he wanted to keep on him. With his paperwork updated on his quirk, he got less people giving him crap at school, but Bakugu, he never stopped. So you got your mom's wee quirk too. Fitting for someone like you? Still a useless Deku. Yeah, you got your shitty mom's shitty quirk, rattled off one of his goons. This earned a quick smack from Bakugu. As much as he hates Izuku for being weak and still looking down on him, he doesn't tolerate people making fun of Inko. She works hard being a single mother and sole provider, so he still respects her enough that he keeps his torments solely to Izuku. It's why on Mother's Day, Deku gets a free pass from any torment and he doesn't take or destroy his stuff, since he could be working on something for his mom. Same on her birthday. However, today is neither of those days, so he decided he wanted to get that strange book he always sees Izuku reading. Deku, give me that book, he demands. It's lunch and the teacher isn't in the classroom. Not that it would have mattered anyway, even with the change to Izuku having a quirk. He's still the same quirkless loser they never defended from bullies before, so why start now? The other students aren't much help either. Just because he has a quirk now doesn't mean they want to get to know him, or some are too awkward to try after everything they put him through. So they turn their backs to him. Izuku, with practiced motions, grabs the book from Bakuga's hands, and it flies into his hat, which he flattens down. You shitty fucker! I said give me that book, lunging himself over 3 desks to grab his green-haired prey. Izuku ducks under his desk to avoid the right hook coming at him. He grabs for his bag and pulls out his cloak. A fucking cape, Deku? Bakugu scoffs. You think that piece of cloth is going to keep you from me? He lunges again, Izuku making the cape more pliable to redirect the force of the blow. Kachin as expected bounces right now. What is unexpected is that Bakugu is as good an aerial fighter as he is on the ground. With a few quick explosions, he spins and rotates his body to get a clear line on his target. Izuku is caught and receives a few lumps for his troubles. With a sneer, Bakugu picks up the crumpled hat and reaches inside, fitting just past his wrist into the top hat only to find that it is empty. This infuriates him. Deku managed to distract him enough to hide the book. However, before he can interrogate his prisoner, the bell rings signifying the end of the lunch period. And Katsuki is no idiot. He knows he can't just get away with beating a student in the middle of class. Shitty teachers are that shitty to just let him do that. You got lucky. Returning to his seat, I'm going to get that book from you. Then I'm going to burn it to ashes. This was not much of a threat, but a declaration. One that Izuku took seriously. If he wanted to keep the book safe, he would need to get better, much faster. So that is what led to him working on his escapes. He started with the basics, tying himself to a chair in the middle of his apartment. This got him grounded when his mother came home and found him struggling to get out of the chair, and she nearly called the police in fright. So he relented to letting her know when he was practicing different escape tricks. Started getting really good at getting out of rope and various types of knots. So he started getting different books on different types of bindings, the famous straitjackets, handcuffs. Though he wasn't sure why his mother took one of his books away, he found it in her room and it had all kinds of different ways to tie someone up. None of that compared to when he came home one day soaking wet. He was grounded for the whole summer when he told her that he went over to the beach that people keep dumping trash at, found a heavy microwave, carried it over to the pier, tied it to his legs, put himself in a straitjacket, locked it, and jumped in. He is now forbidden from practicing Houdini's famous water escape ever again. He didn't have a box to escape from, but he understands the principle of the trick. So he's content with that. Those tricks he put into practice to keep himself from getting beaten by Bakugo created a new arms race between the two. He would try to corner Izuku. Izuku would use a trick to escape. Bakugo would find a way to use his quirk to trick or trap Izuku, who would use another trick to escape. He would catch Izuku one day, wearing white paint and striped clothes, and keeping silent the entire day. Surprisingly, when Izuku stays really quiet, he's hard to find if you can't track him based on his muttering, so he jumped him in the bathroom stall and got stuck for an hour in an invisible cage. Izuku came to school as normal the next day. If anyone asked him why, he'd say that being a mime just isn't as fun since you can't talk at all while doing it. Using some of his lackeys, they tried to keep Izuku talking while Bakugo snuck up on him, but for some reason they both walked back inside after talking for a bit. The only thing they can remember is him pulling out a yen on a string and being asked to watch it. So he couldn't trust his minions to help him as they fell victim to hypnotism of all things. This was just infuriating him more. Shitty Deku isn't even using his quirk anymore to escape. He's just using cheap parlor tricks. He fumed, "Not this time. I got a plan. If he can't see me or breathe, then he can't stop me." This ended with them both being suspended for 2 weeks during their 3rd year of middle school after Bakugo filled the entire building with smoke so Izuku couldn't see him coming. However, they both got caught in the gym trying to wrench a book from each other's hands like common monkeys. All this more direct confrontation helped to boost Izuku's confidence a bit more than he normally was, and he only stuttered a lot when he was in real danger, and Kachin, just trying to take his book for the last 2 years, wasn't dangerous to him anymore. More of a game, which he suspected Kachin of considering it as one as well. He noticed that Katsuki had a wider and more inventive control over his quirk than before, so actually being challenged for once greatly improved his uses outside of blowing stuff up. By this time, Izuku had managed to get the 2nd and 3rd locks off of the trunk, and in that was the props for his hypnotism: mime paint, a deck of cards, and an endless kerchief, which he thankfully hasn't had to use the last 2 as he considers them his 2 most dangerous props. He still practices so he doesn't hurt anyone if he used them. But during his suspension, he began playing with knives, much to his mother's chagrin. But he managed to get down the folding knife trick. But not a lot of people are going around stabbing children these days, so he isn't sure if he could do it in the heat of the moment. But finally his suspension is lifted, and the results of the mock high school exam came back and would be announced when Izuku and Katsuki returned to school, which confused him since the results came in 3 days prior, and why the school wanted to wait until they had returned seemed suspicious. The moment they were both in homeroom, however, an announcement for them both to head to the principal's office rang out over the PA system. "What did you do, you shitty nerd?" hissed Baku. "And me? Why would I have gotten us in trouble? She probably just figured out you were the one to break her windshield." Izuku replied. "Oh, and who was the one that filled the gym with balloon animals because he was scared of a little fall? You had me 50 feet up. Yeah, well, you didn't have to get out your stupid cloak then, did you? Jerk. Coward." "Boys," came a third, more stern voice than the either of those two. Realizing they had been arguing all the way to the office, they stepped inside. "So I brought you two here, and delayed the other students from finding out the result of the mock high school exams for one reason. Pausing, raising the tension between the two boys, neither yet knowing the implications of this. You both applied for UA, and you both passed the mock exam with flying colors. A duo of what rang out from them, one surprised and one irritated. You shitty nerd. What do you think you're doing going to UA? I'm going there, and they don't take losers like you. I have just as much of a chance as you do of getting into that school as you. Izuku began his retort. However, a very deep clearing of a throat alerted them both that something was wrong. Now before you both start an argument in my office, the principal began, lowering her gaze to meet both the boys. You just got off of suspension. Do you really want to jeopardize that after such good news? Both boys slowly shook their heads. Because we haven't had someone from this school make it to a premier academy, like Shiketsu, much less UA. So I am going to give you some slack and pretend I didn't hear anything about a windshield or balloon animals, and you two are going to go back to your classroom and be on your best behavior today, or the consequences will be dire. Are we clear? See Crystal. Yes, ma'am. That's great. Putting on a bubblier attitude. Have a great rest of your day. Waving them out of the office. Look here, nerd, said Katsuki as he shoved Izuku into a wall. Just because you passed a fake test doesn't mean you have what it takes to be a hero. Just because you are as much of a loser as the rest of these side characters doesn't mean you should go strutting around like a big dog. The only thing keeping Izuku from rolling his eyes was that Kachin would probably punch him for it, and he didn't want to get punched today. So remember that when I take the crown, and you can wallow with the masses at my feet. Letting him go and stalking into the classroom. After the principal's suggestion that they behave today, the rest of class went pretty normal. He surprisingly even got a few students to come up to him and congratulate him on passing UA's mock exam. He didn't know who a single one of those people were. So he packed up his belongings and started to head home. He had 10 months before his entrance exam at UA, and he felt that he hasn't improved at all. He still isn't any closer to unlocking the 4th lock on the trunk than he was 5 months ago. As Izuku slowly made his way down the path he normally takes to an underpass, where he practices some of the tricks his mother doesn't want him doing. So he keeps them hidden in this underpass in a crack in the wall, by fitting things into a spare hat he has. A signature All Might hat with realistic hair action. At least that's what the advertisement said. Really, it just made him look like a rabbit. But he found it doesn't even have to be a top hat to work with, but it seems other types of hats don't hold as much. Slowly getting out the various tools he wanted to practice with, he heard a rumbling from beneath his feet. He sees a slime begin to ooze out of the storm drain a few feet from him. Alarm bells are ringing in his head that he should run, but he's never been in a situation like this before. Real danger, from a real villain. Oh, what a wonderful disguise this new body will be, gurgled from a ripple in what he assumed the face of the blob was, its 2 large eyes rolling in the slime as they focused on him. Gonna have to make some space to fit me in there, though, so I'm just going to need to empty you of your insides. Don't worry, it won't hurt. A malicious cackle settles, echoed by the design of the overpass, the sunlight casting through the gelatinous body, shading everything in a dismal, sickening green. For long. Moving faster than you would think capable of this large blob, he latches onto Izuku's leg and slams him into the ground, dazing the poor boy. Scrambling to grab anything he can, his hand reaches the deck of cards lying about. Oh, you want to show me a magic trick, do you? Giggled the fiendish Jello. Izuku looked down and realized he had changed into his magician's outfit to practice. It helped him focus and get in the mood, which is why he did this in an underpass. His mother had seen him once dressed as this, and after 15 minutes of her taking photos of the cutest thing since he was 4, he decided he would prefer to not have an audience when he dressed up. Pulling a card from the deck, his only response is, "Don't blink," and shuffles the deck in the most elaborate means this sludge has never seen. He formed the deck into a Mobius strip only to flick them into a blade. A quick slash of the tentacle, holding his leg, frees him from the villain's grasp. You didn't think it would that easy to capture someone, did you? Izuku mocked. I can tell you haven't a brain, since I can see right through your head. With a hearty laugh, Izuku dodged the next tentacle to come his way. He wasn't sure why he taunting this villain, one who said he wanted to kill, disembowel, and wear him like a suit. He was terrified, but yet he never felt more alive at this moment. Something in him wanted to show off, and he didn't have to worry about a booing crowd or his mother walking in on him, just dying because he got too close to a villain, which, since he watched so many hero fights and wanted to be one himself, felt right. He felt in the zone. He felt like he was suffocating. He didn't realize that each time he had cut pieces off of the villain, they didn't go back to the main body. Instead, they formed behind him like a wall, cutting off his escape route and limiting his movement until he stepped in it, which caused it to collapse on him, wrenching the blade of cards from his hand and pushing him deep into the muck. I'll admit, kid, you put on a decent show, but you can't escape now. I got you, and your little hardening quirk isn't going to do anything to protect you now. As Izuku scraped and clawed at the slime, hoping to yield a grip to pull himself free. You can't swim out of this. I'm thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. There's nothing for you to grab onto with me. Feeling a rapid jiggle in the ooze, he twists his head to sound of clanging metal and a heroic voice he would know by heart. Fear not, for I am. It's suddenly cut off as All Might himself takes in the scene before him. The villain he had been chasing through the sewers had managed to grab a child and from the looks of it has stopped moving. Ah, the great and magnificent All Might, monologue the villain. It's about time you caught up to me. Had you been a little faster, this child might not be dead. An evil cackle rings out from his mouth. He put up a good fight too. As you can see, I have him right in my. Feeling something off, he notices that the boy he had grabbed is no longer inside of him, but instead a gaze up to All Might's rapidly approaching fist. He sees the young child standing behind All Might. Detroit smash! And a massive gust of wind in the small space scatters the villain into many small puddles. A sharp gasping for air can be heard, and All Might turns to see that the boy is clutching his knees, sucking down large gulps of air. How did you? The boy raises a hand with a finger extended, causing All Might to tilt his head in confusion, until the boy vomits up some of the villain's slime and his lunch. Oh God, he tastes so bad. Tears in his eyes, from nearly suffocating. He was trying to get inside me. I'll never be clean. Izuku has yet to acknowledge his savior. If you hadn't shown up, I'm not sure how I could have gotten away from him. Thank you, All Might. All Might. His sudden realization turns into a shriek. Oh God. It's really you. Oh my God. Oh my God. I just got saved by All Might. This delves into a mutter storm never seen before as he seems to be able to ask multiple questions at once, asking for autographs, his favorite food, movie about his quirk. It began to overwhelm the immense man in more ways than one. Young man, if you ask these questions too fast, I won't be able to answer them all. All Might began. Now first off, are you okay? It seems the villain had dueled you for some time before I got here. Thankfully, you have a teleportation quirk to get out of his grasp when he was distracted by my press sends. That's a good head on your shoulders to notice a distraction, he praised. Izuku's head spinning that he was getting complimented by his idol. Now before I can autograph anything, I need to get this sludge contained so he doesn't reform again. He reaches into a shopping bag, pulling out 2 bottles of soda and emptying them down the manhole he had risen from, slowly begins scooping the slime into the bottles. All right, let me help. Izuku rushes over to his stuff and starts digging through his bag. Nonsense. Give me 5 ISH minutes, and I'll have this all cleaned up, not wanting to strain the poor boy who probably went through the worst time of his life. Noticing that the boy was standing there with a black stick, Noah wand in his hand, waved it around and the slime began levitating, swirling around the boy until like a stream of snot, speedily soared into the bottles in second, leaving All Might the only job of putting on the cap. Izuku unaware of how tense he just made the mountainous man. How did you do that? Well, it's my quirk? Izuku, confused and unaware of the change in tone in All Might's voice. I just levitated him into the bottles. But you teleported out of the slime? His fist slowly clenching. Teleportation and levitation are 2 unrelated quirks, so how can you do both? What's your name? Oblivious to the situation he is in, and frankly too starstruck to think anything bad of his hero, I'm Izuku Midoriya and I don't have a quirk. Well, not like other quirks, it's different and a gift. The term gift set off a few alarms in All Might's head. knowing only one person capable of gifting a quirk to another. After quickly placing the bottle in his cargo pockets, he grabs the boy in a tight embrace and hurls himself across town. This rightly freaks out Izuku, who screams the entire way. Landing on the rooftop of a skyscraper, All Might's figure suddenly casting a very imposing shadow in the dimming light. All Might. Is everything all right? Izuku now fearful of what might be happening. You need to tell me now who gifted you that quirk. His stern voice leaving no room for argument. As he stalked closer to the boy, he knew this was a bluff. He was nearly out of time for the day and could feel the blood forming in his gullet. I met this old lady. She ran a shop and I drew a card that gave me a chew quirk. Clenching his eyes shut, in fear as his favorite hero seemed to consider him a threat, an even bigger one than the sludge that almost killed him not 5 minutes ago. Upon hearing a wet cough, he looks and sees a large cloud of steam. Unsure, he watches it dissipate and a lanky, skeleton-like man is left standing, wearing clothes much too large for him. Where's All Might? Who are you? What's going on? Panicking. Kid, calm down, Wheeze. I am All Might. The mysterious man coughed out, wiping dripping blood from his mouth. If you calm down, I'll explain. Hearing this, Izuku does the only rational thing. He panics harder. Oh God, this man is an imposter. I just got brought to a deserted and secluded location with a strange, unknown man. My mother warned me about this. I should have listened. Now I'm going to be on the news. Izuku muttered, help, stranger danger. I need an adult. Kid, calm down. I am All Might. See. For a fraction of a second, his muscles bulge, and All Might is standing before Izuku. He deflates with a cough. I'll tell you why I'm like this, and then you tell me how you got those quirks of yours. Deal? Deal. Izuku scuttles a bit closer to hear All Might's tale. One where he received a nearly fatal injury, which almost ended his career and has effectively put a time limit on him. After hearing All Might's story, Izuku shares his, of him being bullied for being quirkless, how his mother struggled, his quest to find someone. He didn't notice that when he mentioned the rumors of a man in a black mask who had multiple quirks, All Might took great interest. Once he explained the shop and meeting Sophie to him, the practicing his magic and what led him to today. So do you believe me when I say that I don't have a quirk, but can do magic? Young Midoriya, I have heard some tales, many of them false, some of them true. After hearing that Izuku feels deflated, his mother doesn't believe him, not truly, and All Might thinks he's a liar. But I can tell from what you told me and the conviction you spoke with, this isn't a lie. You really met a strange old lady who gave you a magic card, and now you have a power all your own. He would need to press Izuku to get information on this man he had tracked down, so he would do what it took to get this out of the child. He seemed like a good kid, one that believes what he is saying at least. But I need to know a few things. This man that you were tracking, do you remember where it was? He inquired. Seeing Izuku nod, that's fantastic. I need to find this man. He might be a very dangerous villain, and we can't let him just do whatever it is he is doing. Oh my gosh, I was about to try and meet a villain. My mom told me never to do that. Izuku cried. He knew why his mother had told him that. Villains were dangerous, and this is one All Might himself was hunting. What could have happened to him had he caught up to the man? Your mother sounds like a smart lady, and you understand that situation you were almost in. That's also a necessary tool to being a hero, knowing your limits. Well, I still have to turn in this sludge villain to the police. All Might walks over to the door, growing big and busting the lock. You should be fine, get down from here. And if anyone asks, and just say All Might dropped you off here. With a boisterous laugh, he sailed off into the horizon, not noticing the bottles had fallen from his pocket. The walk home for Izuku was a very different one than what he had planned for the day. Fighting a villain, almost dying, meeting All Might, sharing his secret with All Might and learning his in return. He realized he had forgotten to get an autograph in all of that commotion. A large explosion from a few blocks down tore him out of his thoughts. Running over to see what the problem was, he recognized a few of the heroes keeping the pedestrians back. Death Arms, Kemui Woods, MT Lady, and Backdraft. What truly caught his eye was what was there to keep the people back from. The sludge villain had gotten free. Damn it, this villain has a quirk we can't beat and managed to grab a kid who's blowing everything up. Waiting for the villain to turn, Izuku felt a growing dread in his gut. He didn't know many people who could cause explosions on their own and was hoping it wasn't who he thought it would be. When the sludge turned and Izuku's eye fell on the face of the closest thing he could call a friend, with a look of sheer terror, the face of someone who doesn't want to die. Izuku did the only thing he could think of. He ran at the slime. This time he reached deep into his hat and grabbed the first object he could, his deck of cards. Making a mace out of the cards, he ducked and weaved his way to the villain. With a recognizing glint in the villain's eye as he swung the mace down, burying it in the slime creature's head. With a laugh he began taunting Izuku, well, look who it is, the little magician who couldn't, and no all might to be seen. How do you think you can beat me, with just a hardening quirk? It's not a hardening quirk. Using the cards to spread out from the slime's body, he started having them perform intricate patterns at a very fast pace in and out of the slime's body, slicing him into ribbons, grabbing Katsuki's head and forcing it out of the slime, to give him a chance to breathe. Why the fuck are you here, you shitty nerd? Spat Katsuki, in between breaths. I have this under control. He's right where I want him. Really now is when you want to be a stubborn prick. Just accept the help so we can both get out of this. He doesn't realize that Katsuki's left arm is still in the slime and swings toward his head at a frightening pace. Popping with explosions, Izuku freezes when he is face to face with oncoming death. Only it doesn't come. A furious gust of wind blows through the alley, heading skyward as the clouds part and a sudden downpour hits them. Fear not, for I am here. A boisterous call comes out of the great hero All Might. The onlookers and other heroes, gobsmacked that someone so prolific and powerful showed up to handle this situation. Wow, that's All Might. One punch and he changed the weather. How did he get here so fast? That's why he is the best. In all the clamor, Izuku gathers up his belonging and slinks out of the alley, not one for the attention of the cameras, unaware that the video feed of the alley has been watched from an office by a small, white, furred dog bear thing. I guess I should be making some changes to who we take if that's the possible heroes we send out into the public. Can't even handle a pile of goop. Could think of at least 3 ways for each of those heroes to have handled that situation. Shaking his head as he turned off the monitor. Pressing a button on his desk, Miss Secretary, please inform the other staff members of a very important meeting. We have much to discuss. Right away, Principal Nedzu. The walk home took Izuku a lot longer than normally would have, since he had ended up on the other side of town. As he was passing Trash Beach, Bakugo caught up to him. Listen here, you shit. Just because you were able to stop that villain doesn't make you better than me. I'm still number 1, and I'm going to be the best. Katsuki declared, I don't care what tricks you pull. You will never get one over on me like that idiot slime or those other useless heroes. You hear me, Izuku? Bakugo was taken aback when he looked at Izuku's face. Tears streaming down, he didn't know what to do. Normally when Izuku cried it was because he had bullied him, not because he challenged him. What the fuck is wrong with you? I'm just happy you're alive to tell me that, Izuku sniffled. I'm glad my best friend can still see me as a challenge at least. I was having a crazy day, and that you still want to be my friend makes me really happy. Not wanting this public display of feelings to go on any longer. TCH, whatever nerd. Just be there at the entrance exam in 10 months. You better get in. I can't expect a challenge from the other losers who might try to get in. He stomps away in a huff. Goodbye, Kachin. Izuku shouts back to him, hearing a very loud fucking nerd as he turned the corner. Izuku chuckles to himself. He called me Izuku. He hasn't done that in almost 10 years. And all that had to happen was for me and him to almost die today. From the same guy no less. How crazy is that? I am coming around the corner like a normal person, as a screech emanated from an alleyway. All Might has slid in front of Izuku. Young Midoriya, he coughed up blood as he deflated. What's up? All Might? Izuku surprised that the hero had taken time out of his day to track him. I thought you were surrounded by reporters. How did you get away so quickly? Nonsense. No journalist has what it takes to keep me down. I practice the technique of getting away from them regularly, he laughed. I came here for a very important reason. I was not fair to you. When we first met, I treated you with suspicion because you reminded me of a more dangerous time in my life, and this wasn't very heroic of me. But when I saw you jump in to save your friend, I knew then you had what it takes to be a hero. So I want to do something. I want to train you to be the next symbol of peace. You want me to be the next symbol of peace, Izuku repeated, unsure of what he was hearing. How would you do that? He inquired further. I want to give you my quirk, beamed the emaciated man. I don't know what to say. Today I started out finding that I passed the UA mock exam. Then I fought my first real villain, met my hero, shared secrets with him, saved my only friend, and now I'm being offered the chance to have his quirk. That's right. All you have to do is say yes. All Might, I refuse, he said with confidence. Yes, now all we need to do is strengthen You refuse, stuttered All Might. Not to sound rude, but can I know why? Clearing his throat and to take in a large breath, Izuku tells his tale. For all my life, I wanted to be a hero. I tried everything I could to get a quirk of my own, and a few years ago I finally did, and I had never been happier. I worked hard to get this far, and I believed in myself. It wouldn't be fair to take a second. I was already given this amazing gift, one I wouldn't trade for anything, but to take your quirk too, I couldn't. Not if there are other people just as qualified who need to be given that chance. It wouldn't be right of me to take it all for myself. So I know I am being selfish for refusing, but please respect that I want to be a hero, with my power and not yours. He took in a large breath from this rant of his. A quiet took hold over them, Izuku waiting for the proverbial hammer to drop and get yelled at or insulted. What he didn't expect was laughter, not the taunting or mean type, but genuine, heart-tickling laughter. Oh, young Midoriya, you are too much. The perfect candidate to accept my power, and you still think of others before yourself. You will make a fine hero indeed. I respect that you want to do this with your own power, and for that I want to help you. I will find someone else to wield my power, but I will still help train you, to see you become the hero you want to be. All Might ponders that he had never met someone with such a conviction for good in them. Surely the world will be a different place without him using my power, but I still believe it will be a good place just for him being in it. Really, you'll help me. Izuku is beaming. He never thought that he would get hands-on training from his own personal hero. That's amazing. I can't wait to start. Well, young Midoriya, it will take some considerable time, especially if you want to get into UA. Even I had trouble keeping up with the curriculum, explained All Might, adding under his breath. Mostly the normal classes, though. Izuku is too excited to have caught that part, though. I will need to speak to your mother before and get her permission, and we'll need to be secretive about it. Izuku is staring at All Might and nodding his head so fast one would think his neck would snap. With a smile so wide it threatens to tear his face in half, he had never seen a child so genuinely happy. So first, my name is Toshinori Yagi, and I will introduce myself to your mother as All Might's assistant. Explain that you and All Might had taken down a villain together and was impressed with your attitude and wants to help you reach your full potential. Secondly, if she says yes, we will need a training regiment, one that helps your body to grow stronger and to help strengthen your quirk. But let me be clear, this training is to make you stronger, not hurt. So if you deviate, I'll have to call it off. I will not be responsible for a promising young child working himself to death just to impress me. Are we clear? Izuku nods his head even harder. Absolutely. I won't let you down. I'll be the best student you ever had and make you proud. Glad to hear it. But first, let's get some grub. Got any preference? Katsudon, he shouted with more childlike vigor than he meant. Blushing profusely, he coughs. Katsudon, I would like to have that, if it's all right. This earns a chuckle from the older man. Funny, Katsudon is my favorite too. This begins Izuku's training to enter into UA and become their unofficial problem child. Author's notes. Yes, it is done. Also longer than all my previous chapters combined. 7,845 words just of the story alone. Worked 2 whole days on this. Hope I didn't screw this up. But now I can do the fun stuff. How Izuku meets his new friends. So let's address a few points. After the sludge villain, Katsuki has some respect for Izuku, because he understands he was in a shit situation and not even aware of how close he was to dying because everyone else was waiting for someone else to save the day. So now he's starting on his road to redemption. It will be long. It will be awkward and confusing. He will make mistakes and hurt those he cares about because of this. But he will improve. As for Izuku, I tried to come up with creative ways for him to use his magic. Not to be the strongest, but to survive longer. His sword is made of cards. It can cut, but it is very brittle, just like paper. So those familiar with that concept can understand. So he had to get as many cards as he could inside the sludge. Not that he could cut it to pieces, but he could cause it to give him enough time to pull out Katsuki, which almost worked. The reason I placed his deck of cards and the endless kerchief so high on his list of dangerous abilities is simple. He can make a deck of cards a weapon. If you read or die, he isn't at that level, but he could reasonably cause some serious damage to a person if he is careless, and the endless kerchief will make its own appearance later. I also made hints at more tricks he has practiced and their future uses, not wanting to give them all away just yet. So he will get a few new ones and some different ways to approach his magic, since he will have guidance from a more experienced person. Also, Izuku and All Might are not training him to get one for all. I think I handled his rejection both fairly and believably, if I didn't sorry. I just needed a way for him to not have the quirk. So those who were thinking he was going to get it, sorry, that ship sailed. It's going to someone else, pretty sure I know who, because that would be fun, but I'm not telling. So the training will be less focused on his physique, but he will still get in shape. No more string bean for this kid. Yes, they will still do it at the beach and clean it up. I don't want to change that. It's good community service and hero work to clean that mess up. That he doesn't get recognition in the canon line annoys me, so Emma give Izuku some street cred for that. I also just decided that All Might's favorite food is Izuku's favorite food, because I'm lazy and a dad should like the same food his son does. Yes, I am working towards Dad Might. Deal with it. Yes, I also decided that Inko is a kinky woman. Deal with it. This part will come back up at a random time when he realizes what that book really was. Yay for childhood trauma. Now let's get some community involvement. Because I mentioned earlier that the school will have dorms, we as a collective will decide who gets into the dorms and who would not. Some guarantees are going to be made. 1A and 1B will share the dorm. It confused me when they showed the floor plan and the building still had so many empty rooms. Assuming all other dorms were like that, just making one dorm 50% bigger would house both the Hero Core students. Izuku is in the dorm. No point to have a dorm and not introduce him to the new environment. So Green Bean is moving out. Todoroki is not in the dorm. Sorry, Enji is a jerk dad and wouldn't trust his son not to slack off or be infected by everyone else's failure, and would want him there to explain any weaknesses of All Might's and to give him extreme training. Sorry, can't save him from his abuser yet. Katsuki will not be in the dorm. He will stay home deliberately so he can patrol the streets looking for villains to capture, to try and get more experience and show he is not weak. This will not end well for him. Not really a spoiler, but the general rule is don't split the party. Eureka will be in the dorm, as said earlier. Her parents pay for an apartment, just change it to the dorm. Monoma will be in the dorm. He's a dick and will be the instigator of many disputes. This gives me fun to work with. As a result, Itsuka will be in the dorm to keep him from getting murdered by the other classmates. Mineta will be in the dorm, because the little perv will need some educating on not being a perv, eventually. This will highlight structural faults and points of entry that will be abused later. So pay attention. Everyone else is up to vote on who you want in the dorms, so do your research on who goes where. The more people in the dorm, the higher the chance that your chosen waifu/husbando gets paired off. Not quite ready to start using OCs, but do think of some. I need to fill business, general, and support with some more students. I have an idea for a villain who has a rabbit quirk similar to Tsuyu. Just for a gag that they would have the worst time fighting Izuku. Not sure if I want to use that or just toss it in an omake. Also, I will do Omax at some point for little possible stories that happened at some point in time, but not that it matters when. Next on the agenda is release schedule. I will try to do a release once or twice a week. I cannot guarantee a time or day. I work 6 days a week, and the one day I have been coordinating with friends to run games of Starfinder in the evening, so I want people to know I am busy sometimes. Next, because of the nature of my work, sometimes I may get a bit more technical. I am an EMT. So the describing of wounds and some treatment will be a bit more in-depth than some stories might have. If that is going to be a problem, let me know. I can cut it back to more acceptable violence levels. Not spoilers, every student is getting CPR certified. I'm not having a Holy crap, they are drowning. Some do something. They are going to be heroes. Basic life-saving techniques will be taught to them until they are second nature. They will all know how to apply bandages, tourniquets, and basic wound care. Those rescue classes will teach them, not just have them run around saving people without some practical knowledge. Next, entrance exams. There is a chance for a lineup change. Read my last chapter author notes to get an understanding of the new nature of the entrance exam. So if you can create a convincing argument for why someone would be able to pass the exam and into the hero course, please do so. There are not a lot of options, since Gen Ed, business, and support have very few students in them. As for OCs, we are going to need some people to fill some spaces, so if you want, consider someone who has a quirk that wouldn't necessarily get them in the hero course but could get them in one of the other courses as more background characters to provide support for the main cast. So I can justify the students being at a higher power level by getting some support and ideas. Otherwise, everyone is going to pillage Izuku's hero notebooks for the knowledge, which would make him more popular, but to me it might seem weird how only this one person thought of all these uses for quirks and gear needed to make it better. I could roll with that. While it makes Izuku's dateable score go up with the people around him, it makes everyone else seem pretty dumb for not thinking of this themselves or finding someone else who has. The next chapter will probably be shorter than this one, with Izuku training with All Might, getting a few new tricks, and maybe the early part of the entrance exam. So don't expect it to cover as much as this chapter did. This was pretty much the prologue. I am now rambling, so I will cut this off here, but remember, give me brutal reviews. I need to know what I am doing wrong so I can improve. I feel this chapter is going to be more prone to problems and bad writing since it's larger, and I need to know what to fix for later so I can give a good story. Chapter 5. Flirting with Everything. To say Inko was not happy when Izuku had gotten home was an understatement. Raising a son like Izuku had led her to pick up a few of his habits as well, one of which was a morbid curiosity with watching hero fights. For her, though, she prefers to watch from the safety of her home instead of on the front lines like her son. She only allowed him this because he swore he would never get involved in the fight, and that he had to be there to get the full experience of quirks if he was going to study them. She also didn't mind seeing some of the more athletic heroes' work. She would never admit that she had used the footage of some more masculine heroes as inspiration on particularly lonely nights. She was still an attractive woman and had a healthy libido. Not her fault many of the heroes looked so good in spandex, but that is a story for Izuku's third year at UA, or why coming home unannounced for the weekend leads to a stern conversation on what socks on door handles mean, or as Izuku refers to it as reason number 103, he needs a therapist. So, imagine her surprise when she had received a very frantic phone call from her friend Mitsuki. Just because their sons are at odds doesn't mean she needs to lose the few friends she has too. It's hard to meet new people as a single mom. So a quick call where she spent much of it just trying to get her friend to speak slowly enough to understand, followed by turning on the television to see in a news broadcast how All Might had saved two young boys from a villain didn't seem to register. Beyond her swooning when All Might showed up, it was so paternal how he protected young children. Until the feed looped to show what happened before All Might arrived on the scene, where she saw a familiar head of yellow causing a completely recognizable amount of destruction, then her own panic attack as she watched a small green head run in swift motion she had seen practiced regularly. Her own idiot son, who she loved dearly, had broken the ultimate rule she had given him when it came to watching these hero fights. Knowing that she didn't need to plan her son's funeral because All Might had saved her son from being decapitated by an explosion, she instead started planning his funeral for when she killed him. The weather was improving, so she settled on a spring funeral. She always liked to see the cherry blossoms in bloom. However, she had to wait for when her son came home, and dinner time had passed quietly, with Inko sitting in a chair watching the front door for when her soon-to-be deceased child came home. Her face pulled into an almost demonic grin of sadistic glee when she heard her son outside the apartment door. Sure, him talking might have been strange, since she swore she could hear two voices, but that was chalked up to Izuku having one final muttering spree before he accepted his fate. So she patiently waited, frying pan on her lap. She hadn't waited long as the doorknob slowly turned and Izuku cautiously peeked his head into the entryway. "It's really dark, Mom," said Izuku, unsure why the lights seemed to have been turned off this late in the evening and that he could hear no sounds from the apartment. "Mom, I'm home." glancing around and not somehow missing the form sitting in a chair a few feet away from him. I think she's gone. This could be good. Maybe we can have this talk with her later, like tomorrow or never. You never is good. Let's schedule it then. A flick of the light switch and Izuku's sudden realization that he was within 3 feet of his mother and didn't even know, so he did what any teenager does when they know they got busted doing something they shouldn't have. He screamed like a little girl and began begging for mercy. As Inko was about to waylay into her son and have a brand new, idiot sun-shaped dent in her favorite cooking implement, she noticed that her son had not returned home alone. Stopping herself from murdering her son in front of a witness, she decided to at the very least ascertain why this person was accompanying her son home. Taking in the sight of this man, he had very gaunt, almost sickly-looking features. His clothes hung loose on his frame, which seemed to be consumed by the size of his suit, which was probably 8 or 9 sizes too big for him. His lips were pushed back into a grin, displaying an enormous jaw that a gigantic set of chompers. If he had some meat on him, he might not look so creepy, smiling like that. Then his eyes, Inko stopped. His eyes looked so tired, so full of pain and suffering, yet so very inviting and full of life. It wasn't until Izuku had stopped his pleas for mercy and noticed his mom staring at his guest that he got her attention back to him. Clearing his throat, Izuku turned to face his mother. "Mom, this is Mr. Tashinori." He gestured to All Might. "He is All Might's assistant, and he has something he wants to tell you." Now the name All Might carries some great weight in the house. He was / is Izuku's positive male role model growing up, unknown where Hisashi was. So when she saw that he had taken to emulate the better-natured gentleman and developed a bit of a hero complex, if an obsession was a bit, then she wasn't going to try and dissuade him from that. It beats him turning into a delinquent who grew up without a father, like it turned out many villains had. So, upon hearing that this person had a connection to her son's idol, and more than a few imaginary trysts herself, she was willing to postpone her son's punishment until more information could be gathered. Collecting herself, she bowed graciously. "Please, Mr. Tashinori, won't you come in? I'm certainly hope my son hasn't done anything wrong." Bringing both of the men into her kitchen, she had begun making tea. It was only polite to offer to guests. The 2 plates of food, untouched on the kitchen table, did not go unnoticed by either of them. Inko was sure the best place to start was some light conversation before ascertaining what type of damage her son had gotten himself into. She loved him dearly, but over the years she came to understand that her son, if left unchecked, could get up to some considerably dangerous notions and actions. "So, my son says you work for All Might. How is that?" she inquired. Clearing his throat, unsure as he had expected to just speak to her about hiring Izuku for the 10 months between now and the entrance exam. He was not ready for the rather shapely woman to want to inquire about him. Maybe it's because he had no children of his own that he didn't think it necessary when underage boys came home with strange men to present wondrous job opportunities to their parents, that they even get to know him. It was pretty common for some heroes to take young impressionable children under their tutelage without informing family members, at least before the government got involved on hiring practices. With a slight frown, he remembered back to when Nana had just grabbed him and started training him, but some creep dressing up like a bat kidnaps a few young boys to train them in his cave, and suddenly it's frowned upon to just get a sidekick whenever you want it. So, he handled this the way he knows how, by bumbling through the conversation like a prat. "Well, you see, Mrs. Midoriya, All Might had," he began, already earning a mental facepalm from Izuku. He was cut off suddenly with a short, "It's Ms. Midoriya," Inko had informed him. "Ahem, well, Ms. Midoriya," he said with maybe a little too much fervor that caused Izuku to raise an eyebrow in confusion. "I like working for All Might very much, with how often he is out stopping crime, catching villains, or saving children. He still had much paperwork to deal with running his agency and mail and other assorted daily affairs. So much of my time is spent handling those such affairs in an office most of the day." The whistling of the kettle drew a pause in the conversation as Inko went to pour 2 cups. A sidelong glance from All Might as she reached up onto her toes into the cupboard to grab a few mugs had not gone unnoticed from the mother. She knew she still had it to turn heads. After adjusting his suit to fit him better as he sat in the kitchen and taking a sip of the tea to clear his throat, he again started speaking, which, leads me to why I had accompanied young Midoriya home. After his incident earlier this evening, of which you seem to be aware of considering I think young Midoriya's reaction to coming home indicated you don't normally greet him at the door with a blunt object. I had earlier just finished a meeting with All Might that I was falling behind on all that I had to attend to in his place, on my own, and that assistant to the assistant was needed in order to keep up, at least temporarily as he, All Might, is going to begin a position as a member of faculty in the coming year at UA. Mentally thanking Nedzu for the flowering language on the many forms he needed to sign to become a faculty member at UA, it was proving very helpful in giving the impression he knew what he was talking about. As such, All Might had given me instructions to find a suitable person to hire for a temporary position at his agency. And when All Might saw how brave your son was, trying to save his friend's life, he decided to do an impromptu interview with your son and myself. And we decided he would do very well filling in that position. All Might having explained to Inko. Now I came with him in place of All Might, as he is very busy, to ask for your permission as he is a minor, and we can't just go around abducting children to work with heroes anymore. He chuckled. So, you say my son, gesturing to Izuku, who sheepishly waved at his mom, who frankly did the absolutely one thing I told him he was never supposed to do when it came to his hobby of hero watching. Her voice darkening, and All Might himself, has decided to take my son to be an intern at his agency until he goes to teach at the most famous hero school in the world. Am I understanding you correctly? Yes, Ms. Midoriya. I knew you were a smart woman from what Izuku had told me about how he was never supposed to get involved with villains. Under his breath, could have also told me how attractive and single she was too. But yes, that is the general idea of the situation. Now I'm inclined to believe that my son has had a stroke of good fortune his way. Heavens knows he deserves it. But what does he get out of this, besides the possibility of being around his idol for the duration of his internship? Izuku took this chance to speak up. I told All Might I want to be a hero, and he agreed to help train me to pass the UA entrance exam. Isn't that great? Not only do I have a quirk, but I can get trained by All Might to make it into the school of my dreams. Realizing what happened before getting attacked that day, he reaches into his backpack and pulls out the form from the principal. See, I even passed the mock exam. Got a near-perfect score too. Inko looking over the sheet, a smiling growing on her face. Her son was making his dream his own, from his own hard work. And with All Might's direction, I should be able to pass the practical portion of the exam too. It was time for Izuku to use his secret technique. His mother had a pouty face that she used on him, so he in turn developed a set of puppy dog eyes of his own to use when he needed to get his way, and he had them firing full blast. Please, this is just what I need to guarantee getting into the school. I can finally be a hero, Mom. I have a quirk, I have a tutor, I have a chance. That's all I ever wanted. Her defenses crumbling from this emotional assault. But there was one that could not be pierced by her son's tactics. Turning back to Toshinori, looking him dead in the eye, she had one question. Any faltering in answering this would lead to her all but throwing the man out of her home. Will my son be safe? Nothing would happen if her son could be put in danger. Under no circumstances will Izuku be put in a situation any person could call dangerous. Toshinori spoke with conviction. The absolute worst is that All Might will work your son to the bone to prepare him for the path he seems dead set on following. It will be tough. He will come home tired, sweaty and covered in dirt at times. But he will never be in any danger. His safety will be his top priority. Inko gave him a once-over, waiting for him to flinch, to give any indication that he was anything but honest. She saw none. Just a man who truly believed that he could provide something for her son that no one else had been able to do before. Though she looked him over a little longer, affirming again that Mr. Toshinori wasn't that bad-looking. Glancing to Izuku, who stared with a waiting gaze of confirmation, she nodded, her son's excitement bubbling over as he did a little dance and cheered. He regained his composure when he realized both of the adults were staring at him. Ahem, I'll go wash up. If you need to speak to Mr. Toshinori some more, that would be a good idea, Izuku. You had a long day, and you will face your punishment in the morning, so don't think you got away with disobeying me. Izuku bowed as he left the room. Sweetie, I just want you to know, I love you, and after what I saw you do today, I have never been more afraid in my life. But I also have never been prouder of the strong young man you are growing up to be. Inko talked with Yagi further into the night. They ironed out what time Izuku was to be with All Might and any other information he would need to begin his training. They devised a dietary plan that would work with her budget, supplemented with some pay that Izuku would be receiving for his work with Mr. Tashinori. A schedule to make sure he kept up on his schoolwork. Then the topics transitioned into their favorite foods, what type of movies they like, some stories from their childhood. All Might left that night with a new disciple to train, another defined to inherit his quirk, and a slip of paper with a phone number on it. He was having a good day. Izuku woke up the next morning, refreshed. He was on top of the world. He met his hero, fought a villain, saved his frenemy Kachin, and now he gets to spend time training with All Might to be a hero. So he might have forgotten how much trouble he was in with his mother, but after doing chores all weekend left him with an understanding that he wasn't to do something so reckless again. The training began the following week. Izuku had received a text from All Might to meet him at the beach near his apartment. It had been filled to the brim with garbage. So All Might has the brilliant idea to have him train his body moving the junk into the bed of a truck that All Might would drive to a dump to get rid of. Now he explained to Izuku that originally the plan was to have him clear the entire beach in 10 months to train his body to handle one for all's power. But since he isn't going to make that the requirement this time, instead Izuku will need to clear up most of the junk and set it around so that space could be cleared for use. Using the various objects, Izuku would need to make space for him to practice his quirk and see what limits he had to what he could do and how to go beyond. So Izuku returned home many days sweaty, tired, and reeking of garbage. But he was making progress. By the end of his 3rd month, he had managed to lose most of his baby fat, leaving him with a rather slim, swimmer's body. But All Might took that as the indication that Izuku was ready for the 2nd step of his training. He had wanted Izuku to demonstrate his quirk to him and see how a healthier body might lead to his quirk being more impactful. So on Fridays, Izuku would put on impromptu magic shows for All Might, demonstrating some of the tricks he had learned. It for the most part amused All Might that Izuku had developed a hero persona so early into his career. Most heroes hadn't decided on a theme for their quirk, so Izuku dressing up as a magician was quite a sight to see. It didn't help that when Izuku would turn his back during the show, All Might would snap a few pictures to send to Inko. But it all came to a head during his 4th month of practice. All Might had been relaxing, since Izuku had just been moving some of the heavier objects, washers, dryers, refrigerators, until a resounding crash and a pained cry came from the other side of the pile. Worried, he rushed over to see a fridge had fallen from the top of the pile, and Izuku could not be seen. Frantically, he lifted the appliance to see if his new charge had been simply squished beneath the object. Worried about how he would explain this to the boy's mother, he was alarmed to not see the child pancaked beneath the weight. He gazed into the fridge, hoping to see the boy wedged into the open area, but it laid empty. He opened his mouth to call out for Izuku, hoping that the boy spontaneously developed a habit of pranking him in the last 5 minutes, until he heard a rattling from the ground behind him. Curiously approaching the microwave on the ground, he pushed the button that would open the door, taken by surprise when Izuku crumpled out of the space. Gasping for air, the boy looked up to All Might's very worried, very confused face. "Well, I had to come out somewhere," was all he could get out before he collapsed on the ground. All this earned from All Might was a hearty laugh. This boy was sure to be the death of him. He knew at this moment Izuku was ready for UA, but was the school ready for him? Into his 5th month, he demonstrated some of his tricks with the endless kerchief, using it as a whip, controlling it like a snake, tying up All Might, who would admit that the kerchief, while not impossible to escape from, was definitely harder to get out of than he had assumed the multicolored cloth would be. Izuku was very proficient with the different ways to tie people as well, so All Might had him demonstrate how he would tie people based on their quirks, since just putting people's hands behind them would do a fat lot of good for a great many quirks. Since most emitter-type quirk users tended to use their hands, Izuku had taken it on himself to practice tie-ups that would place the hands under the chin of the person trapped, so that any attempt to use their quirk to escape would result in them blasting their own face off. On his 6th month, All Might informed him that maybe he should practice super moves. telling him that normally students at UA didn't work on those until at the earliest their second semester, but that giving him a head start wouldn't be an unfair advantage. So Izuku turned to his trunk on the weekends to look over his props and tools. Taking in the tools he had, he decided that he would try to make something of his most offensive tool, his deck of cards. He practiced with him in forming various weapons, but he never considered that to be much of a super move. So instead he thought back to when he fought the sludge villain, when he used his levitation to move the cards inside the slime. So he created his first super move, Card Guard, by swirling the 52 cards at high speeds, spinning and rotating them around him. They created a fairly effective defense against thrown objects and projectiles, intercepting and even cutting through sheet metal that All Might would toss at him, at reasonable speeds of course. So Izuku turned one of his greatest weapons into a shield. All Might was surprisingly strict about what tricks he was allowed to practice after having a discussion with Inko about some of his more death-defying stunts. So All Might had to watch out if he started edging a little too close to the water, or if he seemed to have found a bunch of knives. It was relatively uneventful until Izuku asked All Might to lock him in a fridge, or since they couldn't find anything to tie up the fridge if he would just hold the door closed and Izuku would try to escape. After 5 minutes, All Might got worried that Izuku had run out of air. After finding the fridge empty and Izuku had come around the corner with a bag of chips from the convenience store down the way, he may or may not have tossed the young boy into the ocean for his antics. At last the 10th month had passed. Izuku had managed to shed all but the last of his body fat. Growing some lean muscle, he looked quite athletic. But now came the important date, the entrance exam. Izuku had tried to get All Might to spill the beans about what he was walking into, but All Might was surprisingly tight-lipped about that aspect of the school, said he didn't want to take away the magic. But Izuku was confused when he had to fill out a few extra forms when he got to the school, asking about his quirk and if he wanted to enter under a utility, rescue, or combat test. After reading the short description of what was expected in each different choice, he wasn't sure, but since he had been training with All Might, and had even had 2 fights with a villain, he decided he shouldn't have too much trouble with a combat test. The day started with the easiest portion, the timed written exam. They had 90 minutes to complete. Izuku only needed 15. He wasn't the first done. Kachin, a boy with blue hair, one with bicolored hair, and a very attractive girl with long black hair done in a ponytail had all finished before him. But 5th was pretty good. So he spent the remaining 75 minutes taking in the other students. Some he could see what quirks they had just because of how their body looked. That was one of the disadvantages he could see of mutant-type quirks. You couldn't hide much from your opponent, and so he began to categorize the quirks he could see. A large boy with a face mask and what looked like large webbed arms was writing in his test. As Izuku had turned his in, he wasn't worried about getting accused of cheating. He noticed a set of floating clothes that at first made him wonder if someone was using telekinesis to play a joke, until he realized that the person and from the manner of dress, a girl was actually invisible. Another girl sat in vibrant pink skin. From her demeanor, he could tell she was struggling with the test, along with a few other students. Another girl with bull horns and what looked like horse hooves seemed to have a book out. Unsure if that was cheating, but no one seemed to question it. Craning himself to perhaps see more, he understood it as a Japanese-English dictionary, so she was a foreigner. Unfortunately, Kachin was sitting next to him, and the last few people who had caught his gaze were female test takers, so that earned a quick yank to his seat. If you think you can just perv on all the girls this year, just because no one knows your worthless ass, be ready for me to knock you off your high horse, you Houdini wannabe. And used to being called a pervert, this got Izuku to defensively wave his hands. No, Kachin. It's not Lee like that. I was just admiring their quirks. His face turning a bright shade of red. Yeah, sure, and I'm just looking out for your reputation, he quickly retorted. This exchange earned a harsh shushing from the blue-haired boy. If you two are just here to distract people who are taking their test, you should leave and not disgrace this school any further. With what would be called saint-like restraint, Katsuki managed to not fling himself over 3 rows of students to pummel the person who dared to shush him. Only his mother does that, and he still fights back when she does. Shut up, loser, and worry about yourself. Not going to waste time with extras like you who probably got here because he's a stuck-up know-it-all. Izuku turned away from the 2 feuding teenagers. As more and more students finished the test, there were small groups of students chattering with each other. The proctor, present mic, with a quirk that let him make a cacophony of noise, surprisingly had sharp hearing so he could tell the discussions were not about the test itself, and most takers were just getting to know the person in proximity to them. He did shush a few groups who were getting a little louder. So it helped to relax much the room to know that he wasn't terribly strict after they had finished their test. Izuku had turned to the person on his left, as Kachin didn't seem to focus with him, since he had set his sights on sending vaguely disguised death threats at the tall boy who in turn started quoting school regulation and waving his arm like a robot at him. As a rare outsider to Kachin's ire, it looked oddly cute to see him so worked up over something so insignificant. But that was Kachin, had to always be the best, so everything was a competition to him. Even first impressions with strangers. Noticing that the girl to his left had finished a few minutes ago, he introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya. What's your name?" Extending his hand to hers. The orange-haired girl pushed a few strands out of her face. "My name is Itsuka Kendo." She took his in her hand, and Izuku was suddenly aware that her hands were gigantic. She realized this and promptly hid them between her thighs. "Sorry, when I'm nervous sometimes I can't control my quirk completely." A light laugh Izuku let out. "It's okay. I'm a professional when it comes to being nervous. If I didn't have my power, I'd say inducing mild panic attacks was my quirk." A little humor and confidence is something he had picked up spending so much time around All Might. How could you not? He told so many jokes and just oozed confidence, so Izuku was glad that it seemed infection. Because he got a giggle from the young lass, which he found very cute. "Thanks, that helped calm me a little." She placed both of her hands on her lap, considerably smaller this time. "So you finished in 15 minutes? You must have either studied really hard or you're really smart." Placing a hand on the back of his neck, rubbing, Izuku sputtered out his reply. Well, I did a lot of studying in my free time. Kachin is someone who's really smart. He spends more time practicing his quirk than reading a book, because he thinks practical knowledge is better than being a nerd." Hearing his name used, he quickly turned, assessed what was spoken, and belted out a quick, "Yeah, better than being a shitty nerd." Only to turn back to the blue-haired boy who was now reprimanding him for his use of language. Hearing another cute giggle from Itsuka, Izuku returned to the conversation. "Yeah, him. Before you ask, yes, we grew up together. He's really nice underneath that rough exterior." "He's about as rough as barbed wire," she retorted. This time Izuku suppressed a snort as he imaged it in his head. He found himself at ease with speaking to Itsuka. "So, what did you sign up for? Utility, rescue, or combat?" he asked. "Well, my quirk lets me make my hands bigger, so I trained with my parents to learn a martial art." She then took the time to take in the figure of the boy sitting next to her. He seemed to be wearing a suit, a tuxedo to be more specific. A brief glance around the room, and it was apparent to her that he was either overdressed or everyone else was underdressed. "So do you always wear a suit when you go out, or did you just get let go from prom?" she chided the young boy. After a brief flash of pink on his cheeks from the teasing, Izuku had pieced together a response. "Well, to be honest, I figured I wouldn't be the only one. So many people's quirks can work much better with even just a different set of clothes. I expected more people to bring items that help their quirk or could be used in conjunction with them to help pass the practical. I didn't know the rules allowed that," was her response. "Well, they don't explicitly state you can, but they don't explicitly forbid it either. So I figured it was one of those hidden rules. If you were clever enough to figure out that there was more to these tests than just what was presented, you could do better, and I figured you could bring gadgets, tools, and even weapons to help you pass the test. I mean, no quirk can do everything." "Wow, you're really observant. What happens if they say you can't use stuff? I figure your clothes aren't the only thing you brought." With a wink, "Though the suit cuts a fine figure on you, did you get it tailored?" "Well, if I can't use anything I brought with me, then I'll have to change up my act on the fly, which may be a bit difficult, since I practiced my act using my props, but I think since the combat has us fighting faculty." Pausing for a second, which confuses me since I had heard from a reliable source that the previous years had the students just smash a bunch of expensive robots, but that wouldn't be fair to kids who don't have combat-oriented quirks. Izuku began muttering to himself about what would cause the school to drastically change their position on entrance so quickly. A light tap on the head from an oversized hand brought him back to reality. "Oh good. I thought we lost you there for a minute. What was that about?" Rubbing his head, "Sorry, It's a bad habit I picked up. I get like that when I have a lot to think about. But well, I just thought it odd they decided to change it is all. And no, the suit isn't tailored. It's magic. He beamed. Another cute giggle. Oh, you are just too much, Magic. Now I see it. You got a theme going. I can't wait to see what you do. So, I said what I was doing and a little about my quirk, so it's your turn, my sorcerer's apprentice. A large grin. Well, I decided to go combat. I already have some experience from training for almost a year with a pro and have already fought a real villain twice. I didn't beat the villain, but I helped. What? You fought a villain before? A little louder than she intended, earning a shush from present Mike and vicious glare from Kachin. The only thing preventing him from tearing Izuku a new asshole for bragging about getting in the way of his fight with that slime ball was that the boy with glasses had taken to insisting that Bakuga's hair was in no way up to regulation and that he would need a proper trim if his quirk had nothing to do with hair. Not one to let someone diss his style, he doubled down and started insulting the boy's glasses as out of date and making him look like a giant nerd. Sorry, but you fought a villain twice? That's amazing. My parents would have grounded me forever if I fought not one but two villains before I even entered a hero school. She grew excited. You got to tell me everything. Her gaze completely fixated on the green-haired boy. Unbeknownst to few other students who heard her outcry had also taken the initiative to eavesdrop on this conversation. Not many people could claim this early in their career to have fought real villains, or to a lesser extent get training from a pro, beyond the kids of pros themselves. So, a crow-headed boy, a frog girl, boy with flat blonde hair, and another girl who had vines for hair listened intently. This young, unassuming child might be the one to take pointers from if he was that smart and powerful already in his life. Well, it wasn't much. Do you remember about a year ago that slime villain who took a kid hostage and was blowing up a marketplace? Izuku inquired. Her nod and the nods from other students who had turned to listen to his tale left him a bit confuddled. Not many people usually wanted to hear what he had to say, so he composed himself and began again. Well, that was actually the second time I fought that guy. I was walking home that day when I stopped in an underpass to practice my quirk. I know the laws say we can't use out quirks in public, but that didn't make sense that I couldn't practice, so I made sure I did it out of the way of pedestrians and other people, in case you know. Another acknowledging nod. Most people were aware that it was against the law to use quirks in public, but everyone knew kids were using and practicing them. In out-of-the-way places too, unless some real damage was done, the police were reluctant to interfere in what they deemed as harmless experimenting and learning boundaries. So it was a societal nod that everyone just turned a blind eye to this usage. Well, I was in the underpass when he climbed out of a storm drain and tried to pull me into him. He said some really creepy things, like he was going to push all my organs out and wear me like a suit. It was really gross. But I had a deck of cards on me to make a sword and started cutting him whenever he tried to grab me. Itsuka raised her eyebrow. A quirk that let her use cards as a sword sounded really specific, but she kept her thoughts to herself. Until he finished his story, she was polite enough to wait until the end to ask questions. I didn't realize that the pieces I was cutting off formed a wall behind me until I literally stepped in it. He pulled me into his main body and I couldn't grab anything to use to get out, and I almost drowned in him, mentally adding. Even swallowed some of his gross self. Had to eat some laxatives to feel sure he wasn't still there. Reinstating eye contact with Itsuka, but you'd never guess what happened. Honestly, if I wasn't there at the time, I wouldn't have believed it either. The villain had been running from a hero, and that's why he needed disguise. Finally, the hero who had chased him through the sewers had caught up, and it was none other than All Might. And with one punch, he splattered the villain into puddles. It was so cool. This put the students listening into awe. It's not every day you meet the number one, let alone get saved by him. But this raised further questions. If All Might had caught the villain, how it came to take a hostage and cause more damage, only to be caught again, seemed like poor writing in a fictional story than real-life events. As if he possessed telepathy, Izuku answered their thoughts. So I did what any fanboy would do after meeting their idol. I bombarded him with questions and requests for autographs. He started chuckling along with everyone else, the bird-headed boys sounding shockingly close to a clucking chicken. This only made him more curious about the raven. So after having a bit of a fangasm, I just started to talk to him, and he is really easy to talk to. You wouldn't think it, but the guy is really corny. It's great. Unnoticed to everyone, Their proctor had pulled up his jacket to hide the growing smirk. "So this is the boy that All Might had spent his time training," he muttered to himself. All Might had let it known that he spent some time training a kid to help him prepare for UA at a meeting discussing the changes to the entrance exam. And as tradition, it seemed that Nedzu had been aware of this for some time, and only reminded him not to give away what was happening behind the scenes, wouldn't want anyone to have an unfair advantage. But he knew that from what the kid was saying, he was the one. After one conversation with All Might, in either form you could tell that he was very much a goofball. So he decided to take a more vested interest in this tale than he had in making sure students weren't cheating. Not that he had much to worry about, there were only a few left, namely a boy with blonde hair with a black streak, a pink girl, and the girl who kept looking back and forth to the book when she showed it was a simple dictionary and that it was allowed under the school's accommodating supplies. It seemed that the only reason that she hadn't finished was that she kept having to return to the book to get a definition from some of the more precise language. Returning to Izuku and his group of slowly ever-growing listeners. So after talking with him for a bit, it seems I had distracted him and he didn't realize that the villain he had put in soda bottles wasn't as secure as he had meant it to be. So he must have fallen out of his pocket when All Might did that thing where he hurls himself across the city. A few nods of understanding that this almost flight was the hero's preferred method of transportation. So I was walking home when I saw an explosion. The frog girl was a bit less patient than the others, it seemed. "So you just ran over to the explosion, Karo?" Again rubbing the back of his neck from the sheer bluntness of what was probably a very stupid thing to do. "Yeah, well, I'm used to explosions." He could tell from the wide eyes that he needed to explain. Pointing behind him, "I grew up around Kachin. He sweats nitroglycerin." This acknowledgement only got a small insult from his blonde friend. "Shut up, nerd. At least my quirk is cool, unlike your telekinesis. As for you, Four Eyes, if my hair is against regulation, your blue top has to be as well." A small chuckle and Izuku was back to his story. "So I get there, and I see the only person I know who can cause a small catastrophe and just walk it off, trapped in the slime. He's really strong to not have been taken over by villain. I didn't last a minute against him, but Kachin had to have been fighting him for at least 5. It was 10, and I had him on the ropes. You didn't need to interfere." "Yeah, you had him right where you wanted him, suffocating on his gross body." "Shut up. He was gross, though." "Ugh, yeah. I blew up some green jello every day for a week because of him. Mom got mad at the mess I was making. Didn't care what the old hag wanted. And Bluebell, you better not be talking about my shoes." "What are those?" So, after doing what I did, All Might shows up again and thwarts the villain with a single punch. It was so cool. It was really stupid to run in. I should have left it to a pro, but they were just standing around. So I got in trouble for what I did. With my mom? Itsuka had waited until Izuku had finished his tale. "So you fought the same villain twice and got saved by All Might twice?" A quick nod from Izuku confirming, "That's crazy. That's bullshit," came a very condescending voice from the blonde boy who had been listening. "So you just happened to fight the same villain twice in one day, and all because you distracted All Might, the #1 hero, from properly disposing of a piece of garbage. What's next now? You say that All Might decided to train you himself. PFT, what a liar." "I'm not lying." Izuku had started to defend himself, only to be interrupted by the voice of the proctor. "Pencils down. Everyone that didn't finish, put your paper on my desk, and may the gods have mercy on your soul," he evilly laughed. "All young listeners, now we will all orderly head to the testing grounds, and you'll be broken up into groups based on what you wanted to be tested on." Leading the teenagers into a large stadium. It seemed to have been prepared for just about any situation. Taking in a large breath to start his introduction, Present Might suddenly found himself rooted to the floor by concrete. The pro hero Cementos had decided now was the time to take the spotlight from his more boisterous peer. "Welcome, young students, to Gym Gamma. In here I will be able to make just about any situation needed to test your potential. So now we will break you all up into groups. Would the combat test takers please head in the direction of Eraserhead and Midnight?" A quick glance by many students to see what looked like a homeless man standing next to a very attractive woman dressed in a very, very tight bodysuit. A few of the male students and some female students were either very excited to go that way or disappointed they weren't. Next will the rescue students head towards Recovery Girl, Ectoplasm, and 13. A few of the students perked their heads up. These were well-known heroes in their respective fields, so the students with quirks suited to rescue were very pleased. Lastly will the students in utility will follow myself, and we will work with Power Loader and Hound Dog. So Izuku had walked over with Itsuka, with Kachin taking the front of the pack, or at least trying to. The blue-haired boy had taken it upon himself to try and lead the group in an orderly fashion, much to the chagrin of the other students as they didn't elect him their leader. Glancing around, he saw the pink-skinned girl, the bicolored boy, a boy with big lips, a boy with spiky red hair and shark teeth, an other boy with silver hair and shark teeth, and the blonde boy with the black streak. A few others had joined in, which made it the largest group. Izuku realized this also made it the hardest to pass in with so many to choose from, simply meaning you had to be on top of your game if you wanted to secure your spot in the course. The homeless-looking man, identified as Eraserhead, spoke up with a deep, gravelly voice, sounding like he hadn't slept in weeks. So you all are here for the combat, okay? So we are going to break you up into two. It was three, but a certain fool had run out the clock, and now we have to do his work again. So to make sure it goes smoothly, you are all going to be testing yourself in combat against either one of us. We will separate you into two lines. You will have to battle for either 1 minute, or until either we or yourself are incapacitated. Ugh, you say the rest. Let's get this over with. The very buxom woman then took center, her figure getting most everyone's attention. Mentally to herself, she knew some who weren't going to do well if they were this easily distracted. To continue what that big meanie was saying, earning a grumble from her colleague, you will have to battle and demonstrate that you have what it takes to use your quirk in a way to fight villains. But since we are experienced professionals, it wouldn't be fair if we kicked you out for not beating us, so it's not a requirement to beat either of us. But do try. I like my prospects to have a bit of a fight to them. She winked. This riled up a few of the students. So because my colleague has graciously agreed to what I say because I won a bet, I will now be the one to get the honor of dividing you sweeties up. So when I say your name, you get to go and harass Eraserhead Kuin, Todoroki, Kaminari, Bakugo, Tetsu, Kirishima, Ida, Sato. As the line started to form, it became aware that she was sending most of the boys to go and combat Eraserhead, much to the disappointment of some of the gentlemen, until the lines would be almost equal. Until Izuku had a sudden realization, he was the only boy that she didn't send over. This made him now hyper-aware that all but 2 of the boys were now glaring at him, clearly wishing great harm on him. Kachin was glaring at him, but for a different reason. This prompted a response from Eraserhead. Why keep the shrimp? Oh, it's easy. Look at him. He's all dressed up in his little tuxedo, and he looks like a magician, and he's so cute. Putting some heavy emphasis on the cute, he could almost feel the boys' gazes trying to literally set him on fire with their anger. And I love cute little boys the most. Suddenly some of the girls were now giving him death-like glares. This went completely unnoticed to Izuku, as he was now so red in the face you could replace his head with a tomato, and it would look the same. Now muttering about how it was just his costume, and how he didn't mean to be cute, and other means of denial. Causing Midnight to start a raucous laugh. Oh, you are so sweet, I am going to save you for last, and really savor it. To Izuku it seemed she was now intentionally trying to see if he could have even more blood to rush to his head in an attempt to see if he could in fact pop from the pressure. Across the building you could hear a cry of anger and frustration, and if you could see that far a very short purple-headed boy was frothing at the mouth. Itsuka managed to shake Izuku back to reality long enough to get him to distract himself with some mental preparation. She's just trying to get in your head, and to be honest, you are dressed really cute and it's funny to see you react to teasing like that. But you are here to be a hero. So get your head in the game and put on a good show. I really want to see what you can do after you got me so hyped up. This little pep talk was enough to get Izuku to begin his meditation. He didn't sit on the floor as he would at home. This didn't seem the place, but it was enough that he could recite some of his prepared words. The boys went by very quickly against Eraserhead. Izuku was aware of what his quirk was, erasure. As long as he looked at you, he could cancel your quirk. So the first person to go was Todoroki, much to Bakugo's protest that he should have first dibs to wipe the floor with this unshaved excuse for a teacher. Let's say after Todoroki found himself unable to use his quirk, he didn't last long in a fist fight against Eraserhead. However, anyone could tell the boy had some formal training as he had adopted a strict karate kata to defend himself, but he was clearly not prepared for such a sudden onslaught. Most of the boys didn't last long. After throwing themselves at him, the only ones who managed a time longer than 20 seconds were Todoroki, Ida, and Katsuki, the two former because they had some formal combat training, which came from being sons of pro-hero families as Eraserhead was aware. However, Bakugo caught him off guard a few times. Not many people with such an offensive quirk were that capable of close-quarters combat, and this boy didn't fight with discipline, but like a rabid dog, taking a full 43 seconds to subdue all because he made a mistake and misjudged the scarves that had wrapped themselves around him. As for Midnight, most of the girls were unprepared for the sudden assault of a high-speed whip and wound up very much tied up very quickly. Ashido has lasted some time after melting through the whip until she suddenly fell over asleep. Izuku, aware that Ms. Midnight's quirk, somnambulist, allowed her to release pheromones that induced sleep. Izuku would have to be careful to not get knocked out like that. So when it came to his turn, he was prepared for some moderate flirting from the older woman of questionable age. As the last person to battle, he had quite the audience, as most people stayed to watch how other students fared. Some left early, the bicolored boy one of them. "Oh, my cute little magician," preened Midnight. "I am so excited to see what tricks you have to show me, but I just have one question. Where is the top hat? It really is needed to complete the ensemble." Reaching to feel the top of his head, he realized he forgot his hat. This caused a few of the other test takers to laugh. Taking in a deep breath, mentally, "It's showtime. Oh my dear, I seem to have misplaced it. Well, that won't do at all." His sudden shift in demeanor to one of a showman catching the attention of everyone else. "How could I be so forgetful? Well, let me correct this mistake." Pulling out the wand and with a toss in the air, catching it in his right hand and with a tap of his left, the top of the hat popped out of the wand. A quick spin and suddenly he had his hat. A few of the girls clapped at the trick. Bakugo giving a curt exhale of disapproval. "Oh well, now I seem to be out of a wand. What magician is without a wand?" Getting a few more gasps as he shoves his arm up to his shoulder into the newly formed hat. Rummaging around for a brief moment, he pulled a second wand out. A fluid toss of the hat for it to land on his head. "I'm ready whenever you are, my lovely assistant." With a full bow and tipping of his hat to Midnight. "Oh, you are going to be fun. I knew it was the best to save you for last." Most of the other students had finished their test, so had come over to the combat tests. Seeing a show was beginning to start, more students and a few teachers began to take an interest in the bout. Overconfidence was common among the test takers, but this didn't look to be that. Young Izuku looked like this was nothing more than a sure thing. That because he was here he had already won. A lightning flash flick of her whip hurtling towards Izuku's wand hand, suddenly stopping as the whip was caught in the air by a sequence of scarves tied together as they came from his left wrist. "Oh, I'm sorry, my dear. I wasn't aware you were the type of woman to want to touch whips this early in meeting someone. How scandalous." In faux shock, as he gave a quick yank on his kerchief to which became like steel, levitating in the air, he let go as Midnight's whip, unable to escape from the slowly curling scarves as they snaked their way up toward her. Realizing that it would be better to engage the child in close combat, she quickly closed the gap and delivered a swift kick to his abdomen. Unfortunately, it was a very telegraphed move, so Izuku had plenty of time to use his cloak as a means to rebound the attack. So Midnight switched up her style, moving around and going for an aerial attack. Everyone bar Katsuki was shocked when her heel kick stomped the cloak straight into the ground, as if no one had been there a moment ago. Lifting it to inspect on the chance that she had turned the student into paste. Unaware that the hat Izuku had been wearing was unnoticed behind her. Only the sound of clapping caught the attention of the audience. "Well done. That almost hit me. But remember, a magician is a master of escape. You'll have to try a bit harder to get me than you are now." Gloating. Izuku wondering why he was gloating. He had only done that before with the slime villain. Why was he now showboating? Was it because of the crowd, or did he just really want to impress Midnight? This lapse in thought left him open for her to invade his personal space and deliver a quick jab to his gut. Had Izuku not trained with all might, that might have been the end of Izuku's trial and would have blacked out from the pain. It was a well-placed strike to his solar plexus. Pushing himself back to gain some space that she just wasn't willing to give him, Izuku resorted to the deck of cards that he had in his pocket, quickly forming them into rapier. He began jabbing, riposting, parrying, dodging her assault. From the outside, it looks like she was overwhelming him, but they both knew this was a simple but beautiful waltz between them, only further enticing her to want more of the young lad. She began to speed up, to which Izuku slowly began backing away, but she didn't follow the rapier. He had left it there defending all by itself as it floated in the air. Turning to the students, he gave a quick bow. This, however, set off Midnight. Her 60 seconds were almost up, and she was not going to be the first one to lose to a student. So she gripped the cloth on her arm and ripped a big hole to begin releasing her quirk on the boy, which is exactly what he was waiting for. Seeing that the pheromone was based on smell, he broke the rapier up into the individual cards and using his practiced super move, Card Guard, he began swirling them around, rapidly like a giant fan, pushing the pheromone onto the crowd. Realizing she had just put the other contestants to sleep all over the gym, she quickly stopped using her quirk as the only people still conscious were Eraserhead, herself, and Izuku. Just as the timer reached 0, Izuku quickly closed the gap between them, unsheathing his wand and stabbing it toward her face. Unprepared for the sudden movement, she waited for him to strike her. Until he didn't, the wand, as he moved it toward her, had transformed into a single red rose, which he presented on his knees. A beautiful rose, for a beautiful assistant. I would love nothing more than to continue our dance with each other at a later date. He continued as he strolled away, snatching his hat and cloak from the ground, the kerchief slowly winding up his leg. However, next time, let me be the one to put people to sleep. It is the magician's job after all. With a hearty laugh, he had left Midnight standing on the mat, blushing profusely as the young man had exceeded every one of her expectations. Quickly realizing that the other people were still asleep, she began to wake them up. When Eraserhead walked up to her, "Namiri, I want you to know that at 4 times in that fight with that student, I tried to erase his quirk. Not a single time did it stop anything that he was doing." "Aizawa, you tried to interfere?" Namiri was shocked that Aizawa was admitting to taking an interest in the boy as well, enough to see what he would do when he suddenly lost the ability to use his quirk. "I'm amazed you were that interested in the boy. Normally my quirk can erase quite a number, but what I saw that boy do, either he has a dozen quirks or something completely different. I want him in my class," he all but demanded. "Not fair. All the good ones get put in your hero course, while I'm stuck with the Gen Ed students." She pouted. "At least send him my way a few times. I love cute boys, especially if they got style like him. You're a walking lawsuit, you know that? Only if I get caught or they kiss and tell. I am here. What did I miss?" The sudden boisterous voice of Japan's #1 hero as he entered the gym, only to see all but a few people asleep. A slumber party. What a novel idea. Both Eraserhead and Midnight had a few questions for the gigantic man. "Where did you find this kid? What are you teaching him? What is his quirk?" All Might was aware he had a long discussion coming with some faculty who were probably not going to believe the explanation Izuku had given him and stuck by. Over the months they were training together, he had tried to ascertain the real story, but it never changed. What was apparent was that Izuku had made a wonderful first impression on the teachers. Author's notes. I'm so sorry for taking this long to update. As such, I spent more time to make the chapter extra long, just for my loyal fans, of which I have dozens, literally dozens of them. Mwahaha. So to address a few things I think people may wonder after finishing this chapter. Yes, Inko is a dirty girl. All Might isn't much better. If that causes people to be concerned, just know that a planned omake in the future will involve Inko and All Might together. So be prepared, because despite my positive and nice exterior, I am a deeply disturbed deviant. Also, for those wondering when Izuku is performing, he is a natural flirt. But when he's not, he is as easily flustered as everyone else makes him. Instead of his serious hero mode, I instead gave him professional performer mode. So he will do what he has to maintain composure. Afterwards, he will realize everything he did. This will also be used as a weapon by me against you, to throw off any attempts to ascertain who the shipping target is. I like to write it in such a way that it could be obvious, or that he could have many potential, and no one is safe from my horny mind. This does include teachers and other pro-heroes. They also have a chance at the Deku of Deku. Next, to address a concern of mine. Why this didn't come out earlier this week. So I may have mentioned that I plan to start a tabletop RPG with some friends on Tuesday. This would result in myself mostly doing housework that day and cooking to bring food. Yes, the DM also has a habit of providing a home-cooked meal. Ain't I just the best? All of you who play will understand that how rare it is the DM is such a gentle and benevolent soul, right before he's 6 giant monsters on the party. But in addition that I worked 6 days a week. However, the chapter that I had intended to release Wednesday, which would cover solely Izuku's training with All Might, turns out I got fired that day. Got into work and they gave some BS excuse that my position was moving in a different direction. So yay for me, I'm jobless, which consequently means I have a lot more free time to write, but not good for my bills since I need money to live. So I will do what I can to write up chapters, however, since if I am on a computer I should instead be using that time to apply for jobs. I will have to set some priorities when I am on the computer. Apply for a few jobs then, right? Don't worry, I have no intention of quitting. I will not let this story end this soon. Thirdly, this is it, boys. All the marbles. The time to decide how much of the canon class makes it into the 1A and 1B. We can deviate from canon here a bit. So let's see who you want in or out. Still has to be 20 people. And yes, the blonde boy listening to Izuku's story is Monoma. In case people were confused, and he is an ass. One I will use for fun and mischief. No homo. Unlike Bakugo, whose ass will be used for feelings and venting. All of the homo. Yup, it's possible we could have a slutty Bakugo. Next, Izuku did not meet with Uraraka as in canon, nor did he further impress Ida. So his original friends are not that. He needs new ones, better ones, friends 2.0. So let's see some input on who you think this young magician should have as assistants. Next, I will be doing my damnest to make sure his classmates are not ignored and not just side characters. So be prepared for him to spend time with a lot of people, and for me to add in some short chapters or omacs at the end where I expand on the rest of my victims. Izuku has now attracted the attention of many female suitors. This does not make him many friends as well. It's not Deku's fault he's an adorable cinnamon roll who needs to be passed around by a harem of beautiful women like he's water and they are in a desert. Finally, I ascribe to the undercover spy for the villain league theory, who I personally think will have no bearing on this story, but be warned I will try my hand at intrigue and write one in. So pay attention to suspicious behavior. Oh, it's so good to write this. Halfway through I thought to myself, am I just writing smut? Should I just write a smutfic about Inko and All Might plowing each other like rabbits? Maybe. We'll see. So finally again, I'm like, Uncle, one more thing. The next chapter will be day 1. Or how Aizawa is allowed to threaten students and not be fired. And maybe touch on the dorm situation. Hope you lot like my writing, and make sure to leave brutal reviews. I need to improve where I can, and I can only do that if people tell me I'm a colossal fuck-up. Until next time, maybe I'll consider more potential fuck buddies for our little troublemaker. New chapter posted, and what do I see but a rabbit heroine in the top 10. Evil intensifies. Also, Enji is an ass. Just wanted to make sure you were all aware. I will find a way to make him suffer.